to winning this one. And now we are seeing the Zacian hit the field, which is another Pokemon that isn't really that great to sit in front of something like Calyrex.
Exactly, and I was going to say, if this is the opportunity for Aaron to bring in something like that Mimikyu, then it's going to be in such a dangerous position. But I think wisely bringing in the Regieleki, because a combination of, you know, Behemoth Blade and Max Steel Spike into that Mimikyu would be able to stop Trick Room entirely. But Regieleki poses a slightly different problem. You know, it could easily go for the Dynamax here, do something like devastating damage or something like a Max Lightning as well. But the issue with Regieleki is, yes, it can hit really hard, but it can't always take a lot of damage.
No, it definitely cannot take any damage at all. You've got to really, I think if you are Aaron here, you've got to, if you are confident, max it and potentially try and take out that Zacian. It's at least one threat gone, but then you're committing to a Dynamax on your Regieleki in front of a Dynamax Dialga that has access to Max Quake, which is not really the situation you want to find yourself in. We are going to see a Dynamax here from Aaron's side of the field, but which Pokemon will it be? You were right, Lou. It is that little Regieleki. Not so little anymore. Yeah, definitely not. And Regieleki is here to play, have fun, and be bouncy in the venue here. But of course, it's got a difficult battle for its trainer here. It can take huge damage from both of these Pokemon. Something like a Max Quake is just going to be able to do so much into that opposing Regieleki. I like the protective from Zacian, just protecting itself from the Max Lightning, from the speedier Regieleki that was indeed going down into the slot, so dealing minimal damage and leaving itself really exposed to something like a Max Quake from this opposing Dialga. You know, we don't know the item on this Regieleki yet. Maybe that could, you know, help it out a little bit, but being able to have that big damage, there we go, Life Orb. So it's not even Focus Sash here. It's going to go down to something like a Max Quake, and that's exactly what we see Shoma going for, and it will be able to pick up the KO. Aaron just not able to utilize Dynamax at all. I think it's just held on, Lou. Did it? Yeah, I think it's just barely held on. No, it hasn't. Oh. Wishful thinking, wishful thinking. Nearly. I mean, I do love Regieleki, but even Regieleki can't stand a Life Orb Dialga. No. Glacial Lance you can see coming out from the Calyrex as well, to no avail into that Zacian, but does do a significant chunk thanks to his Chilling Ray boost as well into that opposing Dialga, but it's not nearly enough to stop it in its tracks. No, and it's not looking great for Aaron right now. He's kind of, his hand was forced there, and to max the Regieleki. I mean, you look, he has brought the Zacian to this match, so his really only options were the Calyrex. But because of that critical hit, taking so much damage, you can't really afford to max it at this point. So you have to go for the Regieleki. Unfortunately, even though I tried to build the tension there, it didn't take the Max Quake, unfortunately. Dialga with the Life Orb, we've already mentioned how strong it is. It's just it is too powerful, and now it's in a great position. It's got the special defense boost, it's got the defense boost, and you're sitting in a great position to either pick up the knockout on whichever the Calyrex or Zacian you choose. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, the Dialga in a little, its HP has been dwindled a little bit. Something from that Zacian could deal significant damage.
看来这场那个右边那一个很难打了，他整个队伍被克制。他现在拼看他能不能几句话结束，可是我觉得很难啊，因为他后手还有一只坚果哑铃呢。不管怎样，你的参想这次一定是下去的。These are all Pokemon that don't want to take a Max Quake. Dialga is having an absolute field day out here. Yeah, and it's gonna faint now to the recoil from the Life Orb, but I think it's put in its work. It has the return that you've got from it. It's knocked out the Regieleki. It's knocked out the Zacian. Two of the biggest threats on our side of the field, and you can't really ask for much more there. And now it's the Calyrex versus Zacian, and you know the Ferrothorn. It's not looking too good for Aaron here. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to get that Trick Room up, and Shoma really just exploiting the weaknesses that Aaron has on his team, and really executing a plan so well here. I mean, what a phenomenal game 2 from Shoma, who will be able to take this set 2-0 with that fantastic Dialga. Huge congratulations and commiserations to Aaron as well. I mean, I really felt for him in that game, but Shoma just showing exactly why he is a world champion from 2015 and is staking his claim to try and take the world champion title in 2022. Yeah, massive congratulations to both players, but what a team that Shoma's brought. Love it. Totally unexpected. Lots of steel types in there, but like you mentioned, steel typing's really strong. It's a bold decision as well, coming into this event and bringing so many steel types because of the threat of Groudon, the threat of
Gigantamax Charizard we've spoken about before. You know, they're Pokemon that these steel types don't really enjoy going up against. But we saw the Dialga with the Power Gem that was revealed, so that's a nice option against something like, you know, the Charizard in particular. And you probably are looking, can we take a G-Max Wildfire? Well, if we can get the knockout 100% against it if it's not holding the Charty-Berry. So, yeah, a really interesting team. I love the inclusion of Ferrothorn. Ferrothorn to me always feels like a very suitable Pokemon to bring to the World Championships. Also, as these like ebbs and dips have been used throughout a kind of format, but then it feels like a good time to bring it now because of the popularity and like reliance and how much players lean on something like a Mungus. And you already mentioned Mimikyu, how reliable that is as a Trick Room setter. Well, Ferrothorn gives you pretty much the best Pokemon to deal with these Pokemon. It doesn't really care too much about what, you know, the threats do. It can come in, it can set up Leech Seed, it can really disrupt, and it always puts that little bit of an actual literal thorn in the side of the opponent. And makes it difficult for any sort of momentum building because you've always got to consider what it is doing. You can't give it the room to allow it to get those iron defenses up because if you get 1, 2 up,
我的盒子时间到期了吗？
even doing considerable damage to things that aren't hit super effectively by the fighting type attack.
And I mean, in that game too as well, Aaron kind of abandoned the Trick Room a little bit. There was I don't believe there was a Mimikyu there. It was all the other different Pokemon. And it was kind of a little bit like Shoma played so well around that Trick Room that Aaron's a bit like, okay, look what you made me do. I need to go with my fast side and bring in the Regieleki and the Zacian. And then Shoma was just like, okay, well, I've got Dialga, and Dialga's going to, you know, do its thing and just prove that it's not just a one-trick wonder. It was able to do so well in games 1 and 2. And I want to touch on that Power Gem as well. I mean, it was a great reveal, and I believe it was going into the Incineroar in that turn 1 of game 1 that then became something else, I think it was the Amoonguss. But I love the adaptation of this Power Gem because a lot of the Incineroars are running things like Sugarberry, and in this game 1 you don't know if that's necessarily the item on that Incineroar. So go for the Power Gem to kind of bypass any Sugarberry issues, I think it's really, really nice to see.
Yeah, and the other thing about that combination is it's very, the Landorus and the Dialga with the telepathy there is very reminiscent of another strategy there, the Earthquake Discharge combination where you've got that immunity to a spread type attack. That's the only spread type attack on Shoma's team, but it's a big, powerful one. You've got the Intimidate there with the Landorus as well. But you're quite happy to fire it off, and it was so useful in that situation there in that second game, where you know, is my max attack going to be enough to get the Amoonguss? Well, it doesn't matter, because as long as I get it within a certain range, then I'm quite confident that my Earthquake is going to pick up the knockout. As long as I get the Amoonguss, then it's worth me doing it, because the Amoonguss is the one thing that can really stop that Dialga from operating like Shoma wanted it to. So you remove that from the field, the match gets so much easier. And like I said, the Earthquake critical hit made it really unfortunate for Aaron, because like I said at the time, I think it took the decision for him to actually max the Calyrex, probably where you want to Dynamax. It just made it impossible for him to Dynamax that one, and then it was very difficult after that.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I love seeing that Ferrothorn in action. We talked a little bit about grass-type Pokemon, you know, having that Rillaboom on the field or having the Venusaur, you kind of often have this core of fire, water, grass, right? And that's been so harmonious through so many classic teams. And then Shoma just, you know, throws out the rulebook and is like, hey, I'm going to put the Ferrothorn back in, you know, this old Pokemon from a while ago we've all kind of forgotten about, and remind you why it is so good. And being able to just sit on the field, apply that pressure, and nullify a lot of the issues that Amoonguss can throw at you. Like you were saying earlier, the redirection, the Spore, it completely avoids all of that. And that's been such a, I think, a good call coming into this day 1, because Amoonguss is going to be everywhere. So having a Pokemon that can still throw a few tricks around on the battlefield and also not be threatened by such an annoying Pokemon, I think it's been really like key, and it was cool to see it, you know, so instrumental in this particular match.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think for that reason alone, I can see it carrying a lot of games for Shoma in this tournament, because it maybe wasn't one of those Pokemon that was on the forefront of a lot of players coming into the event, thinking, well, I don't really need to think about it too much. It's obviously a second thought, because it's not really recent events like with a lot of success, you know. So maybe forgotten about things that kind of do return, that are consistent, are reliable, do work, and it's a very good call coming into the tournament, like you say. I mean, what better Pokemon do you want to sit in front of Amoonguss? That's obviously not a Charizard.
That's true.
Then you go Ferrothorn, so yeah.
Yeah. And it completes the trio of steel types on Shoma's team. And I think that's been really interesting. You kind of mentioned earlier, like, it's a bold move when you know that there's going to be Groudon, you know there's going to be Charizard and Incineroar and things like that running around. But with the kind of rise of Kyogre, you might be kind of hedging your bets that there's going to be literally like a sea of Kyogre on this battlefield. You're going to run into that rain a lot. You're not going to have to worry too much necessarily. And then having your Dialga there to pick up some big damage against those fire types with, you know, the Max Quakes just shows great synergy between the two, particularly when Trick Room's up. You're just able to deal with those threats so easily.
Yeah, it's I think with Kyogre coming into this tournament, like I already mentioned, you know, I already, my prediction, I already feel wrong. I'm like, I want to change him. And I think Dialga will...
Maybe, but you know.
I think it is. You make a really good point. It is a really strong call because it comes in and it is so effective against those teams that you potentially expect to be the teams that players lean on a bit more to deal with the more popular teams in the format. So it makes sense. It's like the double bluff, isn't it? Where you think like, okay, well, let's make a decision here. And it is day one. So you can make a call for going into day one and potentially change things up going into day two if you're successful. But at the same time, I think this team comp very brave because there are risks with it, I think. But at the same time, it's a very smart choice as well for what the potential field could potentially be.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's nice as well to see, like, on Aaron's team, for example, again, that flexibility I was talking about a little bit, where you've got this Trick Room mode with the Mimikyu and Calyrex, but then the fast mode with the Regieleki and the Zacian. And I do like that he completely switched to that, you know, knowing that the Trick Room is going to be difficult. And even if you get the Trick Room set up, Dialga's kind of happy about that. Like, it likes to set off some Max Steel Spikes and deal with your Calyrex Ice Rider, particularly knowing it's not weakness policy. If you're Dynamax, I'm pretty sure Dialga's going to be able to take a hit from the opposing Calyrex, so then it can fire off that Max Steel Spike and be really detrimental to Aaron's plan. So I think it was a really good adjustment. Critical hit was unfortunate, and I think from Shoma's perspective as well, knowing that kind of that lead straight away committed almost to Trick Room, right? If you wanted to go for the Rage Powder and Trick Room, that he just went straight on the offensive, and that really threw Aaron's whole strategy to have possibly a Trick Room option, but if it doesn't work, I've got fast Pokemon in the back. That flexibility went out the window, and Shoma controlled the game from there.
Yeah, and it's kind of difficult as well in that situation for Aaron, because you'd say, okay, let's go the Rage Powder Trick Room route. You still have to worry about that Earthquake, and even though it did get a crit in that situation, it's still going to do a good, considerable amount of damage, and you're still going to lose your Amoonguss. So then what's your option? Especially with what Aaron had kind of brought in the back, the Zacian and the Regieleki. There's just no room to really use the Trick Room there. The only option I could have seen is maybe max your Calyrex that first turn. You reduce the damage output from the Landorus.
你说够的吗？够的，基本上只剩下，看看，它大部分都过期了。还有一个到19点，19点的我看一下那个在哪里。等我一下哦。
But then, if you go for that, you could maybe get your Zacian into the field next to it a bit earlier to support it. But at the end of the day, you're losing your Amoonguss at that stage.
有两个还没过期啊。
Very difficult matchup for Aaron, and I think
你的那一个 DU
just exploited those weaknesses extremely precisely.
你打错了吧
The precision that you used in that you know that second game.
R3Y 你的那个打错了，但是他那一个过期。
His team comp overall is incredible. I really love the look of the team, the Calyrex Ice Rider and the Zacian combination. It's not a combination that we see too often, but a really nice combination because, like you said, it's got the flexibility between the two speed modes. Where you can flip the switch and go for that Trick Room. You've got a really reliable way to set it up with things like Amoonguss.
因为我现在用手机操作比较快。
To get that Trick Room set up, and then when that ends, you've got those Pokemon, the two probably the most dominant, fastest Pokemon to come in and punish and clear up the game in your Zacian and Regieleki. So there's a lot of flexibility here for Aaron, and hopefully he doesn't bump into too many more bad matchups in this tournament.
Hopefully not for Aaron, but of course Shoma made some excellent plays, so let's hear some wise words of wisdom from our round 2 winner and Anna.
听得出来吗？
Hello, I am here with Shoma. Congratulations. You are not a stranger to this stage. If people aren't familiar with you, tell us about your world's history so far.
試合の勝ちおめでとうございます。もちろんあなたはそんなような大会に参加したことあるから、今までのワールド大会についての経験について教えてくれませんか？
2015年に世界大会で優勝したことがあるんですけど、2015年そこからあまり世界では結果が振るわなかった、いい結果を残せてないので、今年は頑張りたいです。
He won Worlds in 2015, and since then, he hasn't been up to much, but he's really going to try his best this year.
Well, you're off to a great start. I know you are interested in telling us about Dialga, and we're interested to hear. So tell us, why so strong?
すごい始まりですね、このカムバックですけど。
哦，对哦，现在已经19点是，对7点已经过期了，那你就只剩下那个衣服可以领而已，其他都过期。哇，那你没办法，那个是限时活动。
Are there any challenges you're looking at, whether it's teams that you're afraid of or players that you are looking forward to playing?
今からいろいろな挑戦があるね。なんかちょっと期待している挑戦があるんですか？次のなんか戦いたい選手とか怖いポケモンとかがありますか？
戦いたい選手、なんか他の僕以外の世界大会で優勝したことがある
哦，辛苦了，辛苦了。
対戦したかったりしますし、なんか戦いたくないポケモンとかも別にないんで、もう何でもかかってこいって感じですかね。
He's very excited to come up against some previous world champions like himself. He's not afraid of any Pokemon. He says, just come at me, bro.
Well, then I'm sure they will. Thank you. Congratulations again. Analysts, come at me, bro, is what he says. What do you think?
Thank you very much, Anna. And of course, I am joined once again by Scott Plaza after what was a really exciting round 2 matchup between Shoma Honami, the 2015 world champion, and Aaron Traylor. And I think I was just so excited to see this match to begin with because Shoma is, I think, one of the most intriguing players in the history of the game. Won Worlds in a very standardized format where he basically piloted the best team and piloted better than anyone else. Shoma hasn't really been able to make it very far on the world stage for the last couple of years, and I kind of expected him to maybe lean into something more wild in terms of his team choice, and he did not disappoint with that Dialga team.
What, you weren't expecting to see a bunch of players with the triple steel meow stick archetype? Nope. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was really fun, right? It's fun for him player, right? Where we've seen him win in like probably the least interesting way possible, and then this is about as far in the other direction as it can get. You get a feel for why would you have a plan for this matchup, right? I mean, like half of these Pokemon you might not have a plan for, let alone all of them together.
Yeah, I want to break down that matchup a little bit because I think that first of all, Shoma's team in itself is really interesting, right? And taking it back to game 1, so let's quickly just pull up some clips here. The matchup in itself, I think as soon as we got into team preview was interesting, but Aaron was playing a more Trick Room oriented strategy, and Shoma was kind of willing to let Trick Room go up, which I thought was interesting, but was able to do a really good job playing around it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so tough here, right? Where, usually the Trick Room team like this, you get it up like kind of clean, turn 1 you feel pretty good, but he just like never actually had control.
Yeah, exactly. So let's take a quick look at the replay from turn 1 of the very first game here. And so in this position, Shoma actually, very critically, this play in itself is already what I thought was impressive. So I think a lot of players, when you see Dialga and Landorus in this position, you'd be willing to just go for a Dynamax immediately, right? And one play that you can go for.
他这一场他的一个对手啊，右边那一个，他真的是属性非常不利。他对上这一组完全是没办法打。一只干龙，一只苍响，就可以几乎克掉他一半以上。
Trick Room's going to go up in this position, right? And that can be a little bit scary because Aaron's team is very centered around Calyrex Ice Rider, especially with this Incineroar, Amoonguss, Mimikyu core. So, Shoma gets a ton of damage immediately on the first turn to start this game, and Trick Room goes up. But I think what's really critical is how the Amoonguss fails to actually get Spore correctly thanks to the Ferrothorn switch in the subsequent turn.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Where you can trick room up, and I think, a lot of times you have a trigger team, you just feel like you've won. Like, all right, I got the setup, but like, it just doesn't get anything, right? It's like easily the most important turn of the game. I think if he hits this spore,
对啊，
really different.
就算要害，
that's not what happens.
基本上也不用要害啦，因为直接你看甘龙参响，然后又坚果哑铃，对面要怎么赢？对不对？对面怎样都赢不了。你要开空间，那开啊没关系啊。可是你开了你也打不赢啊。你唯一打得赢就是白马用大地一巨大地打甘龙那些嘛。可是你打的时候，你相对你要先开一场空间，你要开迷你 Q 哦，很难啦。对面是现在目前是属性完全不利的状态。你要打赢真的是太难。而且电柱他几乎这一边啊，左边的这边完全不怕电柱，他电柱上来基本上是稳死。所以他会上场的一定是火喵、迷你 Q， 还有白马跟参响。然后这个香菇的话，应该也是会上来，因为他要开空间下的话，所以他基本上参响跟迷你 Q 会2选1嘛。可是如果我自己啦，我自己会选参响，迷你 Q， 除非你能猜到对方他的属性是什么。可是迷你 Q 你也没办法打那一个啊，也没办法打甘龙啊，也没办法打坚果哑铃。除非右边的他的参响有配定身战，不然完全打不下去。很劣势啊！我就边看边洗吧，反正今天晚上拿到8个语言吧，还是10个语言就好了。
Even bigger as a problem. Absolutely. So, very critically here, yeah, this is the exact same turn piloted out. So it's like, yeah, you get a knockout, but the Dialga's protected safely, right? So here, Shoma now brings out the Zacian and just goes for the safe protect, right? You've only got 2 turns of Trick Room left at this point, so your Ferrothorn isn't really threatened by either Pokemon. Yes, it's burned, but you've gotten the Iron Defense up, and so, maybe Calyrex here could go for a read, go for a Hailstorm into the Ferrothorn, but I think from Aaron's perspective, it's like, okay, if Shoma maybe gets a little bit greedy here, and I get the knockout onto Zacian, then Dialga's forced to come out and maybe I can
没有，我在领那个宝可梦配布。宝可梦配布优先啊！玩具魔物猎人算什么？魔物猎人吃屎吧！魔物猎人，你半天人家啪啪2声就出来了。不过我最近应该会弄一个啦，冲枪新的影片。上次玩那一个奇袭还 OK， 就是如果想玩的话可以玩玩看，但是有点麻烦。
As you called out earlier. And so at this point, there's one more turn of Trick Room left, and basically what Shoma does is just sacrifice the Zacian here, right? So Aaron critically actually switches Mimikyu out into Incineroar, so, one play Shoma could go for here is opt for the double protect, but it actually becomes a little bit awkward where if you get it, then the subsequent turn, Aaron can fake out into Zacian, maybe set up another Trick Room, but the reality is at this point, Ferrothorn in itself can actually clear Calyrex and Incineroar decently well, and so Shoma says, okay,
我会想用对记忆手把让他自己跑。我用记忆手把好了，我用记忆手把让他自己跑。
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing that was really smart this whole game in general by Shoma.
等我一下。
He got ahead and then he wasn't willing to give up the pieces he didn't actually need. Where you don't get 2 wins if you win.
我记忆一下动作，让他自己全程自己跑。
He kind of just like he let Trailer take the pieces he didn't need. He kept himself in a good position. He didn't get.
当然是跑那个啊，配布哦。
These players are so good.
配布领呢
？World champion Aaron Trailer. He's made to top 8 before. He's a regional champion. So you can't give him anything. And I think he was just very smart to not do anything unnecessary.
Yeah, and at this point, really, I felt like the game was over, right? Dialga comes out, you get 3 turns of Dynamax. There's still Ferrothorn sitting on the field as well, both in our major win conditions, I think, for Shoma here, and you've preserved both of them perfectly.
因为宝可梦它其实蛮规律的，所以不太可能会有其他的问题。
If it spores into Dialga, then it's actually a really awkward position, right? Where that's your main Dynamax option. You really don't want to Dynamax land.
当然是我有开小号删除记录，丢到 home 再继续领。
So whiffing spore puts Shoma in a much better
你不知道这一招吗
？Dialga's a Pokemon that I think a lot of players actually aggressively Dynamax in the early game, and I think it's a Pokemon that's been relatively underexplored. Shoma is truly one of the best players of all time, and if there's anyone that can take this composition and show how to utilize Dialga, I think truly, you know,
我现在发现那个啊，那个武力的缺点，我终于找到它的缺点，很容易沾紫。
Kind of elevating this archetype a little bit. I think both of us were hoping that we'd see more Dialga at Worlds, but we wanted to see it played a little bit differently, right? Where so many of the Dialga teams, I feel like, kind of gave the Pokemon a bad reputation over the course of the season because I feel like so many players, like the only way to play Dialga is you send it out immediately, you Dynamax immediately, you just click your buttons, you win or you lose, you know, and no thinking aloud. And I think this is much more methodical.
我应该至少会洗2个啦，全语言。然后全语言洗完后，明天或后天，我每天应该会洗个2只吧。
By not doing that, he made it much more difficult for Aaron to play his side of the game, and in the end, you know, he was able to get a situation where Trailer basically had to make a read to not lose the game, not to win the game, really.
因为我现在想办法让那个
and he didn't make the read.
I think the second game actually, in my eyes, was a lot closer than players may have realized because
让这些东西，让那个目前我在背景洗的这个，让他看能不能用记忆手把记忆动作。我现在在了解哪些可以做记忆动作，应该从选完人物开始就可以。
This time instead of going for the Mimikyu and the Incineroar. So Shoma decides to just stick with the same combination. And, you know, before we actually let the turn play out, I think one thing to call out is, you know, does Shoma need to make adjustments? He had a nice, like, turn in the beginning of the game, of game 1, and was able to really just kind of blow through, right? So if you're looking at Shoma's perspective, it's like, okay, do you really need to mix anything up? Probably not. Tornadus is really awkward in that matchup. Like, you probably don't bring it unless it's a game 3 where you expect Aaron to play with the fast mode of Regieleki and Zacian, then you bring it as your 4th and Tailwind potentially, and Meowstic feels like it can't really offer much unless you've got maybe Safeguard for Amoonguss.
Yeah, and I think some of it too, right, is, yeah, I mean, I think when you win the first game, like, kind of that handily, or he's just, like, in control the whole time, like, you kind of want the other side to prove they can beat you, especially because, as we kind of saw in this game, it's not like the mode he picked couldn't work against the faster mode.
Exactly. So Aaron ends up making an adjustment. Now, this is really interesting, right? When you see Calyrex and Amoonguss out on the
他们现在在回顾啊，可是你看他不管怎么打这一场战斗了，他的白马王这一边这一组真是太劣势，很难去持平啊，真的。你属性上完全是不利，你唯一有利的就是火喵了，火喵跟白马王这2个而已。可是火喵白马王你又不能麻烦啦，就是重点是在麻烦，因为火喵你也怕大地，白马王你也怕干，你出来你要么先开空间，要么就是晴天。可是你火喵打干龙又不痛。
Dynamax here, but yeah, I mean, just not an option for him to Trick Room anymore. And you know, we saw the first game where Ferrothorn managed to beat Incineroar.
他应该是极具大地吧
Don't want to wind up in that spot again.
Exactly. And so the next turn is interesting, right? Aaron has the decision to replace what the
Amoonguss,
right?
为什么影片坏掉了
and what was later revealed to be Zacian, right?
为什么对战影片卡住
Here is, I think, really tricky in itself, right? Because the problem is, you know, when you're staring down a Dialga, that can just max quick you for a 1-hit KO here. But I think from Aaron's perspective, he's like, okay, well, I see a path to victory here because my Zacian actually is really strong after Dialga's Dynamax. I can just Sacred Sword the opposing Dialga, and maybe if you're confident you're going to outspeed Shoma Zacian, you can just get a 1-hit knockout onto everything, right? So the idea here is, okay, Zacian goes for the Protect, but you're still going to get the Max Lightning through the Protect. Now in this position, maybe Aaron can opt for a Max Guard, but things can get a little bit dicey if you end up, you know, just not targeting that slot, right? So the idea is that Dialga here maybe could go for a Max Quick onto the Calyrex Ice Rider slot instead. But Shoma decides to play safe here and decides, you know what, like Eleki is clearly the Dynamax option here. I don't care if you Max Guard, you're still not going to do much damage to me. And the other idea is by getting Max Quake, you get the special defense boost on Zacian, so the subsequent turn maybe you can actually survive Life Orb Max Lightning.
Yeah, it's kind of just a spot for trouble. Again, I feel like there was almost no way to win where he had to make a read and he didn't make the read. But again, much like the sport thing, if he makes the read, he doesn't necessarily win the game. He just avoids getting played further out of it.
Exactly. So we've got just one final turn to break down here, and it is when the Zacian comes in, right? So critically, Calyrex is still chipping away with Glacial Lance, and at this point, both Pokemon might actually be in KO range from the Zacian that Shoma has in the back. So Zacian comes out, and Calyrex here goes for Protect. I think this is exactly the right play on Aaron's end. The idea is to use Zacian to KO everything in the end game. Sacred Sword comes out here, and Dialga survives with 6 HP. As you can critically see here, the Zacian was actually faster, right? So outpaces everything. And since Ferrothorn was actually revealed to be Shoma's final Pokemon, I think if Dialga faints there, Aaron's Zacian might actually be healthy enough to, clean up the game there. But in the end, Dialga very critically survives with 6 HP. So even though Shoma got all the beginning turns right, that interaction in itself, I think, was really critical for this game, especially since Aaron did have the faster Zacian.
Yeah, I mean, it almost became one of those games, right? Again, I think it's gonna be a storyline all weekend. We kind of like debate the effectiveness of Zacian, but like, yeah, I mean, that could very easily have been that situation where Zacian comes at the end of a losing game and just kind of cleans everything up. It was just that close, right? 6 HP.
Such an exciting battle, though, and this really could have been something I saw as maybe a potential Worlds Finals, honestly. And I know Aaron is a player that's studied Shoma a lot and thinks he's actually one of the favorites to win this tournament, so I'm sure it's exciting for him to go up against Shoma. But a really exhilarating round 2 here, as we already see some very interesting teams. These are definitely not standard team compositions. So yeah, that's it for the breakdown for the second round. Let's throw it back to the casters.
Welcome, trainers. My name is Aaron Zhang, and today I'm here to teach you about one of the coolest Pokemon in the format, Ice Rider Calyrex. Ice Rider Calyrex was first introduced through the Crown Tundra in Pokemon Sword and Shield. It has one of the highest base attack stats in the game and has excellent natural defensive bulk. However, it is one of the slowest restricted Pokemon in the format. As a result, it often carries Trick Room or is paired with other Pokemon that can use Trick Room. Calyrex's As-One ability combines the effects of both Unnerve and Chilling Neigh, allowing it to shut down opposing berries and pick up attack boosts after getting a knockout. Unnerve is especially valuable for Ice Rider Calyrex as it can shut down Shuka Berry, which is one of the most common items on Incineroar in this format. Finally, Ice Rider Calyrex's signature attack, Glacial Lance, allows it to hit both opposing Pokemon with no drawbacks. Since Ice Rider Calyrex is so slow, players often opt to train it heavily in HP and attack, foregoing speed investment. Very occasionally though, you may see some players run maximum speed investment on it to catch opponents off guard. In fact, a max speed Calyrex under Tailwind can outspeed even Shadow Rider Calyrex and Zacian. However, this set is relatively rare. Most Ice Rider Calyrex will run a move pool of Glacial Lance, Trick Room, Protect, and high horsepower. You may also occasionally see moves such as Seed Bomb, Swords Dance, Helping Hand, Heavy Slam, Iron Defense, and Body Press. Ice Rider Calyrex has a ton of flexibility in its item choice. Some common examples include Assault Vest, Focus Sash, Weakness Policy, White Herb, Babiri Berry, and Lumberry. Weakness Policy sets, which are especially popular, are often paired with partner Pokemon that can help activate it, such as Mimikyu with Shadow Sneak, or Porygon 2 with Foul Play or Shadow Ball. Ice Rider Calyrex has a glaring weakness to Zacian, which is the most common restricted Pokemon in the format. As a result, it's often paired with Pokemon that match up well against Zacian, such as Incineroar. Babiri Berry also allows it to survive a Behemoth Blade both before and during Dynamax. The most common restricted partner for Ice Rider Calyrex currently is Palkia. Palkia has strong synergy with Calyrex as it can set up Trick Room for it and threaten Pokemon that otherwise give Calyrex trouble, such as Incineroar or Charizard. Reshiram has also recently risen to be a popular partner for Calyrex, as it has a very favorable matchup into opposing Zacian and into opposing teams centered around Sun. Kyogre and Groudon are also occasionally partners for Calyrex. Outside of restricted Pokemon, you'll often see Ice Rider Calyrex paired with slow Pokemon that can support it, such as Mimikyu, Porygon 2, Incineroar, Amoonguss, and Tapu Fini. Some players have also supported it by using faster Pokemon, like Max Speed Gothitelle and Regieleki, so that it is not solely dependent on Trick Room. Ice Rider Calyrex can be a potent threat both during and outside of Dynamax. It is a popular Dynamax option as it is incredibly difficult to knock out thanks to its overall bulk. Few Pokemon in the format can reliably resist both Ice and Ground type attacks from Calyrex, giving it the ability to quickly sweep through teams while Trick Room is set up, especially with the boost from Weakness Policy. In order to beat Ice Rider Calyrex, trainers will often focus on decreasing its attack. Using its in order to psycho intimidate and party shots is a particularly effective strategy. Moves such as Reflect or Will-O-Wisp can also set Calyrex back a significant amount. Denying Calyrex and its teammates from setting up Trick Room will also put it in a tough position, as it is slower than almost all popular Pokemon in the format. Overall, Ice Rider Calyrex is one of the best restricted Pokemon when it comes to a balance between offense and bulk. Keep watching to see how Ice Rider Calyrex will impact this tournament.
那个不是火焰弹吧？请叫他闭关线。没看过咸蛋超人吗？我记得是吧？我还没特别去研究，反正先拿了再说了。
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our
everybody.
The World Championships happening here in London. My name is Rosemary Kelly, and I'm joined by Adam Doricott to bring you through our next rounds of Swiss here for day number 1. And I mean, this is incredible. We haven't had a chance to talk about this yet, so let's do it. The World's venue is phenomenal. This is my first time in the United Kingdom, and like, you got to show me around, Adam.
Unsurprisingly, not my first time in the United Kingdom, nor London. So welcome to my fine country and fine city. I hope you've been enjoying it as much as I have. It's been a very pleasant trip, but we're already underway with the World Championships. I came in a little bit early, but then before I knew it, we were here. We're already in round 3 of day number 1, and this tournament is really getting away from us. We've been treated so well in the first 2 rounds. We've had a couple phenomenal matches, even though they were shorter games, but still really setting the tone for what is going to be a fantastic tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that it has been 3 years leading up to this point, this is the first and last World Championships that we will have on Pokemon Sword and Pokemon Shield. And this is kind of every trainer going all out to end this era with a bang.
We usually get 3 World Championships in the same generation, like we did with Sun and Moon. Obviously, we changed a little bit there, but around that generation between Sun, Moon, Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, and then Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire, we got so much of the World Championships in that Then we went to Sword and Shield. Obviously, we had to wait a little while, but we are starting off with some really good gameplay. I think what we've seen so far just shows the caliber of player and how dedicated they are to winning the one World Championships for VGC here in Sword and Shield.
Yeah, and especially in a restricted format as well, where you know that the skill level has to be even just a touch higher every single time. We've iterated through these different series of rule sets. The double restricted format makes it so much more unique because you have to think about positioning a lot more. We saw that come into effect in even just the first 2 matches we've had here today.
Well, what's really cool for me is obviously the last time we played Worlds was 2019. That was a restricted format as well when we got to the end of that season.
Yeah.
And when we come right back in with Sword and Shield, we're back on a restricted format. And for me, I just want to know if those players who were right at the top of their game when we were playing in 2019, some of those players that made top cut at Worlds, even won the World Championships or have won previous World Championships, can really pick it apart and say, okay, this format is similar. Obviously, there's going to be some differences. One of them is Zacian, which didn't exist 3 years ago.
No, it did not.
But, you know, how can you adapt that to things you've learned from previous years? And there's always the kind of teaser is,
我记得好像到研究所就可以直接领到宝可梦中心了。
I know about Kyogre, I know about Groudon. I've been doing this for 5, 6, 7 years, and I'm going to be able to use those to the greatest effect by winning the title here.
Well, especially when we look at the circuits that we have had in Europe, in North America, it's definitely been the trainers that have had the most practice with a particular team or archetype that have done the best. Even when, you know, you talk to some of the players that are like, I have 2,000 games with this particular team, and then they end up bringing it to a tournament like the Europe International Championships and end up having great success with that because they just know that team inside and out and are able to adapt their play style based on maybe the first game and just kind of take it from there in the best of 3 format.
I think if you've put 2,000 games into a team, you'd be absolutely crazy not to pick it. Just imagine putting in all that work and then the night before you think, something else is there, tickling my fancy a little bit more, and you just throw it out. And that would be probably
前面教学很烦躁，哪一个？你说剑盾吗？超烦躁的哦！哎，你这样竟然看得到，我都已经挡住一半了，你还看得到那么烦躁的东西。
I'm going to bring something completely unique to Worlds, something that nobody else has seen before or nobody's really put the time in, and I'm going to be the best player with this archetype at this tournament.
而且我现在都用连点，所以只要移动方向就好。
Japan to say, okay, we dabbled with Eternatus in North America. We lightly touched on it, but there was a couple of top cuts in Japan where they, I mean, I believe it was top 4 and a top 8 both had it in, and you think, well, why are they using it to great success? And then you've got to look at that in your World's preparation to say, well, I don't want to run up against this Japanese player who, if you're from, you know, Europe or North America, not know how to play the matchup and just take an easy loss there. So a lot of practice.
没错，我现在都是用连点。我边连点边看台，然后他转播讲解这边我都在看漫画。
You can definitely see small bits and pieces of that, like the way that Zacians are trained. Actually, is a really good example of that. And one of the reasons why I was really interested about how we ended up seeing the Zacians that were trained in this previous match. I mean, Aaron was faster, and so that was really interesting to note because it's usually the Japanese players that have that max speed for the Zacian so they can outspeed, and then sometimes they even put quick attack on the Zacian just to make sure that they have some type of priority damage, and that definitely does help a lot. So looking also just at that, maybe Shedinja as like a really big focus in the European region. Thank you, France. Yeah, even every country in some of these regions does have
有些话不要这么讲的这种直白吗？
when it comes to team building for the game.
虽然我看不懂，但是 everybody 我还是听得懂的。
I've seen it in previous years where you take a Pokemon, you just train it differently. It's not even
我的程度可是幼稚园呢。
out there, you just train it a little bit differently. Maybe it can take 2 hits when traditionally it would be able to take 1. And then you've got a completely different ball game on your hands. Maybe you drop a coverage move for something that just provides you a little bit more consistency, or even in some cases that absolute surprise factor that wins you a game. And when games are as big as this, if it's a top 8, a top 4, even a win-and-in match to the last round, you know, to go to the next day, that could be huge and that could be the difference maker.
Absolutely, and we've definitely seen some of that come to the fold, but we have so much more action to show you. These next 2 rounds will be a double header of round 3 of Swiss here for day number 1, and we're ready with one of those matches on the stage. So let's go ahead and take a look over there and introduce our 2 players that will be competing in this next matchup. We have Oriole Plaza and Hirofumi Kimura.
We're going on this trend of crossing regions with every single match that we play, making sure we get a really nice mix of, you know, what the different regions are going to look like when they play against each other. Yes, each region does play a little bit differently, but there's no reason to expect that they're not going to have a good match. I don't think there's ever going to be a huge mismatch here. These are definitely players that you will recognize if you've been following for even, you know, a few months or a few years.
下一场是谁跟谁打
？2019 Worlds with fantastic finishes there, such as second place, and then Oriole Plaza as well coming in.
我比较想要看对战的部分，我不想要听他们讲解。
And then to make sure that world's invite is secured, cleaning up in those special events. I think both these trainers coming with different levels of experience in this format, particularly with the Japanese players playing a different style of tournament to us, with best of 1 being a bigger factor, then moving on to the best of 3. It certainly allows for a little bit more creativity and changes the game plans a little bit, which when you bring the 2 regions together, is there going to be a stylistic mismatch? I don't think so. I just think we're in for a great game.
I think so as well, and I love that point you bring up about how the circuits are just a touch different. But in this case, we're actually seeing a mirror matchup here. So what ends up being incredibly important is how are those Pokemon trained, and what type of movesets and items are these Pokemon going to have?
This is going to come down to some real fine detailing.
现在就是看那个雷电云到底是不是那个雷电云有没有不服输，还是那个恶作剧之分呢？其他应该都差不多，其他的配招应该都差不多。
I'm going to be able to control the game by setting up a Tailwind, and then let some of my big new shiny attacking toys, such as the Shadow Rider Calyrex, do all of the work.
Well, the one thing about Whimsicott that I think is super interesting when you look at the evolution of how it's been used in Series 12 is that, you know, we used to see it as just kind of a Tailwind setter. It typically carried a Babiri Berry or a Focus Sash to make sure it could survive, to get an extra turn of value. And then we started to see it included on some Sun teams where it was running Sunny Day. And so it was a really quick way to set the sun for a Charizard to be able to fire off those G-Max wildfires. But now we are starting to see some trainers actually utilize a very interesting moveset. And I kind of wonder if this is one that Oriole or Hirofumi would actually be running, which would be something like Charm, which is a move that we've seen here and there, but seems to be more popular now.
It's definitely one of those moves that if you're not ready for it, it can really ruin your game plan as well. Charm is so impactful, of course, being affected by the Prankster, being able to go first. You think you're looking at a knockout, right? You're looking at it and you think, yeah, all I need to do is land this attack, even if it's something like a Behemoth Blade. Yes, I land it, I get the knockout, and I'm in such a great advantage.
就常用的队伍啊
changes that calculation so quickly.
就是大家常用的这些队伍，基本上都会赚的，
already causing problems, and I
会
think
赚队伍很正常。
when you are building a Whimsicott team, there's a lot of choices to make. You've got what we call the 4 move slot syndrome. You've got so many fantastic Prankster options you want to fit in, but you just can't take them all. You've got to think, what do I give up? You know, do I give up Sunny Day? This team probably doesn't need Sunny Day. You're not trying to set up your own Charizard, so that could be an easy cut.
Yeah, definitely could be, and I think that when you look at kind of the matchup as well, seeing that the Thundurus is included on both teams, that does add in a more intricate element where if it is Defiant, you don't want to allow a boost over to your opponent. Let's say maybe you try to go for it and Incineroar switch in, or maybe if something like the Charm or just some type of drop is available, if that Thundurus switches in, well then that's a Dynamax ready to go.
The big thing as well about the Charm that I like compared to something like the Incineroar, which just comes in and intimidates everything, is you can be a little more diligent about it. Like you said, the Thundurus could be a concern. Not throwing that Intimidate around so casually and so blasé allows you to target just what you want. In a lot of cases, it's going to be something like the Zacian, because it comes in, it uses its ability Intrepid Sword, and immediately it's becoming a problem. You can take that away really quickly with the Charm.
And it's -2.
Yeah.
So that's a huge drop in the attack stat. And on top of that, I think what the Whimsicott provides in this meta is also another way to damage mitigate. So it's not just the Charm, which we've seen kind of here and there. more recent sets of this Whimsicott have also included light screen, which is a great way to just be able to set up to deal with special attacks that are going to be coming in from something like the Shadow Rider Calyrex that exists on both of these teams. So again, like looking at the Whimsicott, I think it's going to be very important to see what type of supportive moves it has to be able to help enable the rest of the team.
Well, what's really cool about the light screen and charm combination is it almost does the same thing as the reflect and light screen combination, right? You get to deal with physical attackers with one and special attackers with the other, so it's a really nice pairing. What is interesting about this, you've been talking about light screen so much, Thunderous usually takes a fighting type move as well.
That's right.
And that fighting type move, yes, you predominantly want it to be the max version. You want to max knuckle and keep boosting your attack. But, and I've fallen foul of this, I'm going to own up to this, you can spend as long as you want setting up your screens, be it 1 turn or 2. If you get Brick Breaked immediately after, that is one of the most devastating feelings in Pokemon. It brings a small tear to my eye as I watch my screens get completely taken away. And that work you put in, it's essentially a wasted turn, which in the grand scheme of some of these games, 1 turn can be punished so hard.
That's so true, and especially when you're looking at maybe something like just chip damage going through to break a focus sash, or to just soften up a target a little bit to make sure that you can take it out with one of your more heavy-hitting Pokemon. I think there is definitely some use that we can look at there. I mean, remember at the Europe International Championships, we actually saw some Thunderous that just went for Fly. They were doing a lot of work by just going for Fly and actually not utilizing the Dynamax option, especially when they didn't have the Defiant Boost. Another Pokemon on the team looked better for the Dynamax. So we can definitely see players find value outside of Dynamax. It's just rare.
I genuinely think I've seen more Fly this year than I have in the last 10 years of being involved in competitive Pokemon. While in previous years it's been scattered about and a bit of a joke in certain situations, I do think seeing it now, obviously it becomes Max Airstream, which is exceptionally powerful and exceptionally important with one of the best Max moves in the game. Then being able to change that up a little bit. And of course, some of those tricky end games actually, where you manage to get yourself out of the way of an attack is so important.
For sure. I think pivoting as well is just really important, and a lot of the Incineroar in this format do run Parting Shot as a part of their moveset, so that is a great way to go ahead and drop the attack even further, and I think that's what this matchup is going to be a lot about. Whether you can get in very quickly, get off some big damage, as well as make sure that you're not going to take too much, and I think on both of these teams, there are certainly ways that you can do that, but let's go ahead and kick off game number 1 between Oriole Plaza and Hirofumi Kimura. And we're going to see the mirror on both sides of the Zacian and the Thunderous. But it looks like Oriole Zacian is going to get the Intrepid Sword boost first, but we have to wait a little bit to see if that is a speed tie or if Oriole Zacian is just a bit faster.
It's going to have to take a turn or 2 to figure it out for both of these players as well. They do need that piece of information. But nice to see them both understanding one of the key leads of this 6 that they've bought. I mean, Hirofumi, obviously runner-up at Worlds, knows exactly how to play some of these awkward matchups. If you're following along in his footsteps as Oriole, you've got to feel pretty good, but then it's going to be such a close match. There's the Dynamax coming out already, and surprise, surprise, it's the Thunderous. It's the only option, but it's on Hirofumi's side. So if there's a mismatch of the Dynamax, that could actually make this game very, very interesting very early on. There is going to be the follow-up. There it is. So both trainers early doors.
它速度比较慢一些。
So this is really where the training and those minuscule details that you were talking about really will make a big difference here.
我觉得应该是先打那一个啦，
Pokemon on both sides.
先打
How are they
巨飞了。
Is the Zacian a little bit more attack focused? Maybe the
休息完了这么快。
As we are going to start to see the Behemoth Blade first coming out from Oriole, and that will be into the Thunderous, and so that will be a hefty chunk of damage there as that brings it down pretty low.
That's what happens when you Dynamax it. You're going to be taking extra damage, and guess what?
对方的参响比较慢一些。
He knows that that's a Dynamax.
他是砍龙卷云。
哇 damage. Yeah, that's a slight difference.
哇，被命中要害，哇！
That's a big deal here because
真的是有够衰的。
completely removed from the equation here for Oriole.
哇！
What a
哇！
massive move here for Hirofumi.
整个劣势掉了。
You can follow it up with a max airstream from your own
哦，
Thunders.
左边那个运气真的是有够惨的。
Probably faster. There's not that
日
much
本的
difference,
运
it
气都
feels
这么好
like,
的
from
吗？
the damage calculation of both of these Zacians. So now you're looking at a potential outspeed here.
you're definitely going to be the fastest Zacian on the field, I think, at this point. There's no way that you'd fall that far behind. But speaking of speed control, here comes a Whimsicott that would be able to cause some problems. The big thing there, though, that critical hit changes everything for Oriole. Has to dig deep in his team immediately. Because Dynamax so important in this format. I'm going to call that a zero-turn Dynamax. No max move coming out from Oriole's side of the field. No max airstream, no nothing.
他那个没有被打中要害，基本上还有得救。你像被打中要害，整个是反去，就算他后面还有黑马王也没有用。开顺风吗？顺风他直接砍吗？ 哇，就差那24滴，打中要害还有。
Usually Zacians cannot knock each other out right away unless they have some
type of
attack boost. But here we go. I mean that extra little bit of damage from that max in that previous turn was enough to make sure that Zacian could get the knockout and a super effective max bringing that Whimsicott down to its focus.
能不能双杀？如果能双杀的话，就有机会。
It's a bit slower, but it still seems to work out very, very nicely. And the big
黑马王没办法双杀，基本上这个已经去了。
Capitalize on the fact he did set up a speed boost immediately, and he did get one set up with the tailwind. Yes, his Zacian went first, but then it targeted down the other Zacian. Didn't pick up that knockout on Thunder.
够的好友吗？
I think it started to lose a little bit of pace. Of course, if you do want speed Pokemon, you do have to look at something
你
like
贴你的好了，我加你的好了。
That's going to be very, very fast, and honestly, could tidy up this board position from Hirofumi.
现在对方要么就是守住，我觉得应该是会守住比较安全的。
On Hirofumi's hands, so even though he's in a 4-2 Pokemon advantage,
直接换下去吗？换谁？换老虎吗？ 应该是换虎扇来的，换虎扇来激战。哎，风妖精哦，他也要开顺风。哎，哇，神速！
on Oriole's Whimsicott, so now it is just the Calyrex to be able to shore up this first game if possible, and we will see that the Whimsicott on Hirofumi's side is also carrying a Focus Sash. So while you did get the knockout onto the Zacian, you're also going to be able to see what else Hirofumi may have in the back, and if it ends up being that Calyrex as well, that's a really quick Pokemon then you're going to be able to make that happen. But in fact, it's going to be the Incineroar.
The Incineroar, a pretty good selection here. The Incineroar being able to do massive
哇，
damage.
他是神速还是电光一闪？
Nice little piece of information for later.
哎，好像不能学神速哦，应该是电光一闪吧。
But the big thing here is what can
哇，竟然学电光一闪呢！
Of course, the Thundurus is very, very low. Even if you brought it in next to the Whimsicott, you may be able to kind of, you know, try and get it faster, but it's still not going to catch up with the Shadow Rider Calyrex, and then you'd just be giving over Grimnay boosts. The big thing about that turn, you only get over 1 boost, makes this very, very comfortable. No danger of knocking out the Incineroar there. Yes, you do pick up the Whimsicott, but nothing that we saw from Incineroar so far.
如果刚刚他风妖精守住，也许还有机会。
And we know the Shadow Rider Calyrex does not have the options to hold on as Insurance just tidies up the game.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Astral Barrage, of course, you're not seeing enough of a boost onto the Shadow Rider Calyrex to be able to get the knockout, then yeah, that's a big reveal, though, as well to Oriole, that there is a Dark-type attack on that Incineroar, and so that's some knowledge you're going to need going into the second game.
I'd argue that's something that you probably can guess at this point. There was earlier in the season, I think when we just first started back up with some of the smaller events, people were kind of forgetting about it a little bit, but now every Incineroar has got, you got to think about it in the team builder, and that's just a big reveal that there was a difference, not in the first 3, but that final Pokemon being the difference maker, and maybe Hirofumi saying, you know what, I think you're going to be restricted. I don't want to play a complete mirror. I don't want to play this full, you know, double restricted with the Thundurus and the Whimsicott. The Incineroar feeling really, really good there too, and you know, you can look at the Gastrodon and say, I don't think the Gastrodon's going to be a factor in this match. So then it's looking a little bit dicier on, you know, do you have easy ways to deal with this? But Assurance being able to come through there and pick up a knockout, all the Incineroar needed to do was take that Astral Barrage, and it does that very, very comfortably even after a Grimnay boost. So just being able to bring that in and say, you know what, this is my endgame position.
那我先把这个讯息删除。
sending us into game number 2.
I do think that the choice of Assurance as the dark type attack is interesting because we have seen multiple different iterations of the moveset on Incineroar, and most often I feel like it's been Darkest Lariat. It's not really been kind of, that's not just been, Assurance has not been the popular choice, I guess is what I should say.
I'd argue it's third choice behind Darkest Lariat and Throat Chop. I think those are definitely more popular, but it makes a lot of sense. And if you have a team that's kind of going first, I mean, Incineroar is one of the slowest things on the team. You know, maybe not the Gastrodon, but everything else is definitely moving before it. Maybe something like the Shadow Rider could land an Astral Barrage. You obviously get the double damage from hitting after that. Being able to follow up with a massive Assurance, even a neutral hit, then looks a whole lot scarier. But then the situation we're in now, where you just need it to knock out the Calyrex, you don't even need that extra bit of damage beforehand. So it definitely feels pretty fine to me. I think if you're not so worried about sound-based moves, you can immediately throw out Throat Chop as well. But overall, it really works quite nicely in this matchup, and that is the end game that he needed, and that's the end game that secures game number 1 for Hirofumi.
Well, it was also so smart as well, where you saw the Thunderous just switched out. I think
你这样也看得到哦。
one of the things we've seen as
你这样也看得到哦。
the use of Dynamax
你很夸张呢，你。
that you don't necessarily need all 3 turns if you feel like you've gotten the value
专心看转播，不要看背景，背景不重要。
Oriole didn't get a chance to use Dynamax at all. And so after having 2 fairly large turns of getting some of that damage down and just making sure that you can match the speed of the tailwind, yeah, you can take out that Thunderous and not have to use its 3rd turn of Dynamax in favor of making sure that that Whimsicott that you know will survive because of
你会看到一个戴迷 Q 帽子的
prankster value.
第二场的，第二场才是关键。
better than 0 turns of Dynamax. I'm not a full-on maths with the S magician, but I am able to count and understand that one feels a lot better. So that was honestly a big factor. And there was a lot of work to do for Oriole in that game. Losing your Dynamax so early was certainly difficult, certainly hard to fight back from.
我们在讲什么？
I think he did really well to bring himself into a position where Gridney, with the boost from that, could have done it, but it was just a little bit short. And as soon as you see the Incineroar, you realize actually Hirofumi's done so well at Team Preview to be able to take that one and say, you know what, you're bringing Shadow Rider, I'm bringing Incineroar. Whatever this comes down to, I have a winning position there. And even if the game had gone a little bit differently, I think having that Incineroar might have bought a little more wiggle room with the fake out and being able to throw down some of those intimidates. Of course, you have to be careful because you can't give it to the Thunderous, but if you can catch it late game, it can still be very important.
Yeah,
感觉黑色衣服的比较大。
pieces that we didn't get a chance to
这是现在最右边的那一个。
Right? I think there's still some questions about the Gastrodon. There's definitely not really a place for it, it feels like, on the team right now, and especially knowing that the Incineroar for Hirofumi is actually holding an air balloon. That's kind of cute, right? Like, that's a really cool tech to have to play around, and we've seen just how you can mitigate some of that super effective ground type damage with the Charty Berry on Charizard. Like, this is not a new strategy, but to see it on the Incineroar specifically when you know that Max Quake is just a rampant move available in the meta right now, that feels pretty good.
It's definitely a bit different to the Shucker Berry too. A lot of trainers leaning into that Shucker Berry, and again, my maths isn't the finest, but I'm going to say that 0 damage is better than some damage when you're looking at the overall board position. If you don't take any because you can switch it in with the air balloon, great news. You don't have to burn that Shucker Berry and still take huge amounts from something like a Precipice Blades or a Max Quake or even an Earth Power. So when you're looking at what changes could someone like Oriole make, honestly, I think Gastrodon stays on the bench once again. Then he has to consider, do I bring my own Incineroar? If so, what do you drop for it? Because, you know, the Whimsicott and Thunderous were very important. And it is a hard justification to leave behind one of your restricted Pokemon, you know, but the Calyrex was the thing that brought him so close into that game. Leaving that behind would probably feel quite bad, and I can see a potential for maybe a bit of a run back, maybe assume that Hirofumi, you know, reads a little bit too far into your game plan and doesn't make those necessary adjustments. So that's something that is going to be very important as we head towards game 2.
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how maybe Oriole makes some adjustments. And honestly, I don't know if he needed to. Like, that critical hit changed so much in that very first turn that maybe we see the same types of leads with the Zacian and the Thunderous. It really just depends on how these trainers are feeling, but I do feel like Hirofumi kind of in the end game having that Incineroar available that was really smart to just identify, yeah, I don't know if I need both restricteds right now. It's a little bit of risk, but it ended up having a high reward.
It's certainly the safest and strong lead would be the Zacian Thunderous, and I would look at both trainers, and if they pivot away from it, they're definitely taking a gamble. So really feel like that's the best lead for this team. As there we go, Hirofumi reveals it on his side, and you can already see, thanks to the spectator menu, that it's going to be the same for Oriole Plaza as well. So looks like we could be in for a nice early run back, if you will. But then once again, the Zacian continually going first on Oriole's side. That may be something he needs to capitalize on a little bit more. Of course, the big factor here that could change the game, let's not be, too polite about it. If he doesn't get critical hit, it's a whole new ball game.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely what I'm looking forward to as we see that there is already going to be a Dynamax. It's going to be Hirofumi once again Dynamaxing that Thunderous, but it's a matter of time before we find out if Orioles decided to do the same. It would make a lot of sense, just knowing that most of the time when you bring the Thunderous into a game, that is going to be your Dynamax of choice, just because of how much pressure it can put on.
我用浏览器看直播。我在用浏览器看直播，我只是顺便在刷比克提尼而已。我没看到他一开始的。两边应该是出场都是一样吧，两边都会聚吧。
The Thunderous is still going to be able to cause some problems. We're going to run the turn back so far. Let's see if we go 4 for 4 on how this one played out. As we've already got a difference, there is the different targeting the Zacian into the Zacian there, bringing it very, very low indeed. But here we go for Hirofumi. Let's see where his targeting goes and if he's made an adjustment there as well. He has, as it goes over into the opposing Zacian, but it gets a clean one-hit knockout, being able to show that maybe he's a little bit slower in exchange for something else. The Thunderous are both on the field at full health as well, and a max airstream comes through from Hirofumi's first. So he's been winning that speed tie while Oriole's been winning that speed tie. Now it's up to Oriole's Thunderous to show us what it can do. There's the max airstream, and looking at the targeting from earlier, it's going to go into that Zacian. Both of those are gone from the field, and both Thunderous have set up a max airstream. They've got a speed boost, and of course, no advantage of that. It does mean that
速度一样，接下来就要看出场是哪一只。不过我觉得他左边会出黑马王的，他右边会出火喵。
So that does kind of give away that it's not the life orb at least, and so maybe it has traded a bit of that extra damage for something that might be a bit more survivable for this Thunderous.
风妖精哦，他先开顺风吗？那他后手就一定是黑马王。
Game number 1 run back really far with trainers bringing in completely different Pokemon. Oriole showing off that Calyrex Shadow Rider, and then of course the Whimsicott for Hirofumi.
先开顺风，对方的龙卷云会比较快吗？
The big thing right now is Hirofumi has 2 options that can really control the speed, right? He's going to be able to try and set something up by
会，因为他开顺风再加巨飞，一定会比较快。
Is going to be those consistent max airstreams. So after this tailwind, Hirofumi definitely going to be going first on the Thunderous as Max Lightning.
巨电哦，他要先收掉，哇，他这样不太好，我觉得。
Just a nice chunk of damage though to really make sure that that Thunderous is going to be within knockout range of potentially what might be in the back, but a Thunderous going for a Max Lightning right on top of that too. It's going to take Thunderous to half HP and the Astral Barrage as well, just to make sure you get the damage in. It's not going to be enough to clean up the Thunderous, but it does bring that Whimsicott back down to its Focus Sash.
那黑马王死定了。
Not getting a knockout there, I think, is pretty slowing for Oriole, right? Not getting either knockout there. I think the Focus Sash is absolutely huge because now Hirofumi is comfortably the fastest.
因为他只要电他一次，他的黑马王后手再上来，随便打都赢了。
The Whimsicott has one more turn essentially to try and freely get something done, and what it does is going to be absolutely essential.
除非他左边的他的后手是火喵了，但是我觉得应该不太可能。
At the end of this turn, so if you're going to give that up, make sure it's worth it. This Thunderous is getting exceptionally low on Hirofumi's side as well, as Oriole has decided that his has not done any work. So another game where these trainers understand that if Thunderous can't do anything, you've got to get it out. And big thing, can you get it in to be valuable speed-wise? Whimsicott is very important here.
Yep, so Whimsicott's going to end up taking this Max Lightning instead. So because it's not very effective, you can see that Whimsicott is going to hang on quite easily as Hirofumi reveals that it has Moonblast. And so going into the Calyrex, it's another critical hit. Oriole being on the receiving end of another one in this second game, but
还是他的黑马丸有守住，有守住就有机会了。
Whimsicott double knockout, that is a +2 boost here for the Shadow Rider Calyrex, and just like that, Hirofumi is down to his final Pokemon in this game too.
And of course, that Grim Name means anything I think coming in, because it's single target, is going to be pretty readily knocked out, of course, by that Shadow Rider Calyrex. So a lot of work to do for the Incineroar. I don't know if Incineroar can take this 3v1. Of course, it is going to be looking at something like the Shadow Rider Calyrex. Does land an Intimidate, which is completely useless on either of these Pokemon. It is in the air, which isn't going to be completely relevant here either. So I think Hirofumi may be going a bit slow and getting a little bit punished by that Whimsicott switch in. So trying to tidy up the Thundurus felt very, very aggressive there. Even with the Tailwind, set up earlier, Hirofumi's Incineroar is going to be going much, much slower as double Grim Neighbors, Calyrex throws down the Astral Barrage into the Incineroar, and it's a clean one-hit knockout. Pops the air balloon too.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. It pops that party just a little bit, but that does mean that we are now tied up in this series. Oriole Plaza now at 1 game win, and Hirofumi as well at 1 win. And you know what's really interesting about both of these players as well, seeing how they're piloting these Zacian and Shadow Rider Calyrex teams, is that this is a new archetype for both of them, really. I mean, we did end up seeing a little bit of at least the Zacian and the Shadow Rider Calyrex from Oriole before at EUIC. We did see that, but just a little bit of a difference in having the Rillaboom instead of the Whimsicott. But you also take a look at how, of course, Hirofumi with the Japan Nationals, it's just a different circuit, so you're going to see some wildly different things.
I do think actually Oriole played something really nicely in this game, which I'd like to touch on, is the way that he...
我觉得下一场开场应该还是那个
Because Hirofumi brings that Incineroar in the back, Hirofumi has to respect the Thundurus so much. If you hand over the Defiant Boost, it could very be game over. But
雷电云跟那个苍响上场。
You know my Thundurus is on the field. It's been sitting here since turn number 1 because you didn't take it out with a critical hit. So you now have to respect that. You now have to throw attacks into it, such as the Max Lightning. I'm just going to switch in the Whimsicott, which is either going to take it on the Focus Sash or take it even before that, with Max Lightning not being particularly useful in that regard. And then you're in a position to just say, well, I'm going to match your Tailwind. I then have the fastest Pokemon and, keep going with those Astral Barrages, which is kind of the game plan he looked at in game number 1, but was a little bit behind. So taking advantage of a slight better board position so nicely brings Oriole Plaza to, level up this set and send us to game number 3.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see how this is. I mean, the fact that the Thundurus survived, I think, was absolutely critical there for Oriole. So getting a chance to see that was pretty big for that game win. And who knows what's going to happen if we end up seeing another Zacian and Thundurus at the beginning too. But I kind of don't know if we will. It's tough because that is such a good lead into this matchup. But if you're expecting that from your opponent, do you have something else that might be a bit more beneficial? We're about to find out.
So I think it's a very good lead, but I also think how you target and how you play it is so important, right? And the way that you can maybe capitalize on a change-up from your opponent is also absolutely huge. So the big thing here is, in that last game, they both pivoted to knock out the Zacian. Of course, Hirofumi was able to do it a little bit easier and was then able to cause some problems. But while I talk about how good that lead is, Hirofumi decides it's not the one he wants for game 3.
No, the change here is the Whimsicott now taking that Thundurus's place. And we're just going to go ahead and see some of these abilities go off and then see kind of where we go from there. The fact that we've seen the Tailwind and the Moonblast from the Whimsicott, you have nice damage options available to you, but it really is about the support that the Whimsicott's going to provide.
That Whimsicott can do so much to help out depending on its moveset as well. But the Zacian being able to potentially move first, there's no easy way, or no immediate way rather, compared to Prankster to set up a speed boost. So you have to go through the motions of setting up your max airstream to keep your Zacian going faster as well. Zacian, as we saw in the last game, didn't require a critical hit. Obviously it's going slower, that training's got to go somewhere, and you imagine it's going right into the attack there, being able to knock this out. Both trainers respecting that, you don't want to bring your Incineroar early doors. So being able to capitalize
巨飞应该一下打不死龙卷云啊，不雷电云啊。那巨飞先把那个。
那个
风妖精处理掉吧。哇，猜的真准啊！
The protective course going to keep that Zacian safe, but we will end up seeing Hirofumi's Zacian now get a chance to attack into Oriel's Thunderous, and that will be at least a survival this time around. No critical hit, but that does mean that Thunderous can fire back with a max airstream. And there's a really important note here too, is because we didn't see the tail,
我觉得他这个参想应该不要守住的。 他现在守住反而比较劣势，因为你的速度比对方慢。
Well, the max airstream boost as well forces Hirofumi's hand a little bit, right? If you want to keep up in speed and what's been so important in both games, you got a tailwind, but that means you're not landing the charm and the Zacian. So I really like that protect from in there, kind of saying, you know what, I think you may be trying to catch my Zacian out here. I mean, it got hit last game, so it makes sense to protect it there. And then Hirofumi going into it had no real other options though, apart from that tailwind, which we finally see. Of course, the Zacian now.
应该会先把雷电云处理掉。哎，先处理掉参响。哎，是这样打中要害吗？ 没有。他是全力量的参响。
These tailwind turns are going to be really, really important. Hirofumi is going to have to probably bring something in to maybe try and keep the speed advantage. His own Thunderous would feel really, really good here, especially because, you know, another max airstream, while he's in the tailwind, he's certainly going to be able to pick up this Thunderous, which an easy Behemoth Blade here deals with that, and then his own Thunderous could kind of run through the rest of the game.
Yeah, that +2 max airstream boost isn't going to quite be enough
然后对方的
Oriel to keep up, but when you've got Whimsicott in the back, then you can tailwind of your own, and that does mean
这样会比较好吗？后开。 后开顺风。
Well, Oriel's in a great position here because he can immediately match the tailwind. Then his Thunderous is guaranteed going first because of those max airstream boosts. Able to put down a good chunk of damage. I don't know where you put it here. That's the big question. Is, you know, you're not really hitting anything for super effective damage, but whatever you're worried about in the later game is going to be the Pokemon you want to chunk. And I would imagine something like that Thunderous on Hirofumi's side has got to be something you can.
因为现在开顺风确实会比对方的参响快啊。
With something like the Shadow Radicalirex that he's been bringing in the back so consistently. Of course, the Zacian.
因为你已经升2阶了嘛。
You know, in some of these situations, but you know. What are you going to do? Are you just going to throw?
但是你的龙卷云这回合也是会下去，雷电云也是会下去。
Because of course, when the Thunderous goes down, then your max airstream booster there, you've got a little bit more of tailwind. You could capitalize in that turn, but there's very small and narrow windows where you're going to be the fastest Pokemon on the field. Unsurprisingly, there's the Dynamax though.
Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of what you have to do here, but it really depends on what Hirofumi thinks is in the back for Oriel. Like, if it ends up being that Shadow Rider Calyrex, as we've seen in our previous games, then you definitely need to worry a bit more about how these speeds are going to interact, because Oriel ended up getting that later Tailwind, then you are going to have that stick around for just a bit longer. The Max Lightning as well, just going into Hirofumi's Thunderous to get a bit more damage. At least you're seeing those 3 turns of Dynamax here from Oriel's Thunderous pay off as the Behemoth Blade from Hirofumi's Zacian. That should be enough to get a big knockout onto the Thunderous. But I feel like you did what you wanted to do with the Thunderous here for Oriel.
Absolutely okay with that. You managed to get some good damage down onto the opposing side of the field with it, including some knockouts as well. But then you're feeling really, really good, and you got it set up. Of course, Hirofumi now in that position starts setting up those max airstreams. Whimsicott down to the Focus Sash once again. We know quite a bit about these 6s from both of these trainers. And it's really going to come down to, once again, what is the last Pokemon in the back for each of these trainers? If it's that Shadow Rider Calyrex into the Incineroar matchup, that could be why Hirofumi targeted down that opposing Thunderous last turn, just to make sure Oriel reveals the Shadow Rider Calyrex, and we're going to wait for it from Hirofumi because he still has 2 Pokemon on the field.
打不死吧?
He does. I
难道他用帮助吗？
I think if you're Oriel that you're going to make
除非他风妖精有学帮助，不然很难打死。
kind of keep going from there. Whimsicott still hasn't a turn here, but we did see that quick attack revealed from Hirofumi. So the way that plays out is really interesting as well in terms of the priority and speed. So
being able to deal with the Whimsicott feels really good here, and there it is, taking that massive 1 health away from the Whimsicott, being able to eliminate it and put Hirofumi in what is now a 3v1 Pokemon advantage. Another Max Airstream comes through before the Calyrex even gets that opportunity to move, and I just don't know how Calyrex can do this without maybe some critical hits. It's going to be a whole ask here. No knockouts. I think this one is wrapped up for Hirofumi Kimura.
对方的顺风会先结束了，然后如果对方的顺风结束，对方又没有，除非对方最后一只是火苗，不然，哇，他没守住，去。
And just keep that perfect record so far for these first 3 rounds of Swiss. A critical hit on top of it too.
又命中要害，哇！日本玩家到底是吃什么长大的？介绍一下吧。
With a critical hit, one mattered and one definitely didn't. But your 2019 Worlds runner-up, showing why he is one of the top players here at this tournament and somebody to definitely watch out for. I love that they played a mirror that was very different in all 3 games. Of course, game 1 kind of decided by that critical hit early, but we managed to see the comeback and the game plan from Oriol, which in game 2 became a lot more prevalent, became a lot more important, and he was really able to push on with it and say, you know what, this is what happens. You let the Shadow Rider Calyrex get in that endgame position, it gets its Grimnay boost, and it takes knockouts. In game 3, probably the most honest game of the set. Both trainers executed their strategy with nothing else going on, and you just saw that difference. You know, you bring the Incineroar, you make sure the Thundurus is taken out early, and then you tidy up with it if you need to. You didn't even need to get there, but it felt like there was so much learned in games 1 and 2 that it just gave us that great game 3.
Yeah, and then on top of that as well, that Hirofumi was able to preserve the Dynamax until later on. I think that was a really big thing as well. And I misspoke earlier. Oriol Plaza actually has quite a bit of experience running a Zacian alongside some type of special attacker. And so we have seen the same 6, sort of, except for the Rillaboom in place of the Whimsicott at some of the other events that Oriol has played in to be able to qualify for this World Championships. And so I think that also just speaks volumes to how Hirofumi's World Championship experience has really kind of helped to navigate this matchup.
It's definitely a complete change, though. You know, the Whimsicott and the Rillaboom, yes, they both use priority, but they use them in such different ways.
Right.
And that may be kind of a read that you want to make coming into the World Championships. Say, I'd rather have priority support. I mean, look at, let's say, North America. Grimmsnarl is everywhere, right? Grimmsnarl causes so many problems just by using Prankster and priority support. So leaning into that, playing it a little bit differently feels good. I do think, you know, attacking options on Whimsicott are slightly better. It's rare that you dip into them, but I'd argue they're fractionally better. I like Spirit Break a lot, but I do also just like Moonblast for more damage.
Right.
Being able to capitalize on that feels pretty good in those games that you're able to do it, and changing it up. You know, it's one of those things. Do you stick with the same 6 that you've been successful with in your region? Do you look to other regions and see what they're doing? I mean, obviously, both these trainers, 2 very different regions, bring the same 6. And this is something that we are going to have to watch out for throughout this tournament. If you're already seeing it at these top tables, there's a reason it's there.
For sure, and I think that a lot of trainers have been experimenting a bit with the Zacian and the Shadow Rider Calyrex of like, okay, what 6 Pokemon are going to really work here. And it's kind of similar to what we've seen for how Kyogre and Zacian teams have evolved over the course of the meta for Series 12, where it used to be kind of, you know, pretty simple. You're going to get the Kyogre going with some type of speed control, whether it's a Tailwind or maybe it's some type of Max Airstream, and then you end up kind of changing up the item a little bit. And so we're definitely seeing that here as well, where you do have to make those minuscule changes in order to get the win.
Well, this also feels like a kind of regression for Thundurus a little bit as well, because as we got towards the end of the regular season before we approached Worlds, the Thundurus was looking a little bit different on everyone's team. Some people running it with the Prankster as well, capitalizing on something like the Eerie Impulse and the Thunder Waves, and people kind of baited the Defiant a little bit. Don't Incineroar, I will get a Defiant boost, then you see it, and it immediately Eerie Impulses you, and you realize that game you've made a mistake, you've made an error, you just got to take that one as well. So being able to see these Thundurus go back to the traditional 2022 Thundurus, which is, you know, you're going to take the Defiant, you're going to try and get those boosts, but most importantly, you're going to Dynamax it, and you're going to use Max Airstream, Max Lightning, Max Knuckle, and cause as many problems as you can that way. Of course, there was a slight discrepancy in the item choice. I think the Life Orb is the original OG choice on it, because its whole goal was to deal as much damage as quickly as possible. And that feels like a very safe choice, but of course there are adaptations needed to keep these teams successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've even seen that as well with just kind of the core of the Sun team that has been
been so prominent in Series 12. Come on now, y'all knew we
我也不知道
were
拿的是什么，反正可以输入都先输入再说。
But we haven't seen it yet, and we've actually seen a bit of a drop-off when it's come to what we colloquially call Rinya Sun, which refers to the 6 Pokemon that have really kind of come to the forefront of the meta so quickly in Series 12. So I think that's really great to kind of look at how that has evolved, move sets, the way that Pokemon are trained, even the item choices we've seen just be so impactful for most of these tournaments. And I'm totally expecting we're going to see more of these interesting kind of tricks and changes as we head into
There's going to be some fun stuff, and today is probably the day to see it, right? Like day 1 is for a lot of players, you know, you want to go to day 2. Day 2 is obviously where we bring in a bunch of the invited players. But for some players, it kind of feels like you want to go all in. And I know speaking to some of them, they think, well, why would I take a conservative choice when I do have the option to bring something that I'm comfortable with, you know, and I've made these crazy adaptations to that I just feel really, really good about, that I know I can capitalize on. So there's a lot to think about when you're a day 1 player compared to maybe some of those day 2 players who know a little bit more about the field, can maybe make a more informed read. Of course, there is that option, and I don't know how many people do it. I personally think it's a bit of a wild one where you can change your team.
感谢
You can kind of treat these 2 different tournaments. We obviously bring in a bunch of new players. So today, you know, let's see something super safe. And you think I need something a little bit more exciting, a little bit juicier to play day 1. You could take that strategy, qualify through day 1, and then of course go back to the safe option for day 2. There's so much to think about as the players here. You know, being able to make that pivot. I will argue that day 1 and day 2 are very, very different tournaments too.
They are. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, like, especially in day number 1, you have so many more competitors that are here, and to be able to even make it to day number 2, it's all about consistency. So I think that's another thing to look at when you think about, okay, well, do I really want to change my team? What are you comfortable with? That's definitely a question you have to ask yourself. And also, what is going to be the most consistent? Because sometimes those interesting picks they're not always consistent when it comes down to things, but we will have to find out more as we head over to the stage for an interview with our winner of this round number 3 match, Hirofumi.
Thanks, Rosemary. I am here with Hirofumi. Congratulations again. Now let's talk about that match. It was a mirror match. What can you tell people about how to take on a mirror match?
まずおめでとうございます。で、今回のバトルは鏡ミラーマッチだったと思いますが、どんな感想がございますか？
そうですね、ミラーマッチでは、バドレックスというポケモンが同速勝負発生しやすいんですけど、そこをうまく回避して今回は戦った形になります。
So during this match, I used Calyrex to avoid some of the attacks, and I was able to bring myself to win the match.
Also, we noticed you had quick attack on Zacian. Can you talk to us about your Zacian and how you used it?
ザシアンの使い方について何かファンへコメントございますか？
ザシアンの使い方はとりあえず相手のダイマックスポケモンに居住弾を当てること、これが一番大事ですね。
The most important thing was to
那应该是都一样的啦，反正应该是都一样的。
You've had success before at Worlds. Do you feel confident that you'll be able to get to the finals here?
前回の世界大会でも活躍されていましたが、今回の世界大会についてはいかがでしょうか？
そうですね、今回もかなり自信があるので、決勝まで進めたらと思います。
I'm very confident this year as well, so I'd like to move forward.
翻译人员跑专业。
That you're very excited to play against, or that you think will be a challenge?
今回の世界大会
如果我在这边打出赫普会怎样？
と思っている選手やその他一緒に対戦したい選手はいらっしゃいますか？
そうですね。日本のビエラ選手、穂波翔馬選手とちょっと戦ってみたいということがありまして、過去の大会でも戦ったことがなくて、実力がどれほどのものかちょっと確かめたいというところがあります。はい、穂波翔馬。
There is a Japanese VG player, Mr. Konami, and I am very looking forward to play with him. I don't know what his strategies are, but I wish that there was an opportunity to play with him during this Worlds.
Well, we'll look forward to that as well. Thank you so much. Congratulations again.
楽しみにしています。頑張ってください。
ありがとうございます。Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in. Don't go anywhere because we have lots more for you coming right up after this.
后面发现赌蓝熊刚还压。他们现在那边的时间是4点，没有，是倒数时间了，倒数4分钟。我觉得领这个序号领到有点烦躁了，他没办法全自动跑，真的让我觉得有点不爽。那中间的个时间太久。
Back, we've got our second Swiss round number 3 match here, ready for you for the World Championships, day number 1. We already had an incredible match for our first round 3. We're just trying to fill up the lunch break for you with some content before we end up going through the rest of the day.
What better content is there than more matches?
I know.
Arguably at lunch, a good hearty meal, and I do recommend everyone at home, make sure you take on some fuel now, because we've got a lot of rounds left to go today after this. We go 3, then we just keep on going. Yes, we double up on round 3, but before you know it, we'll be at the end of the day. So a hearty lunch, highly recommended. But if you've already eaten, maybe you're in a different time zone, more matches coming up right here, and that's going to be probably the most delicious.
这两个是赛评吗？还是讲解？
Yeah, I think so, especially when we look at our next matchup. We'll intro that in just a little bit, but it's definitely going to be a great one. We are going to end up going to another, international matchup, and so that's definitely going to be such a cool one to look at. But, I think that when we take a look at how these matches have progressed throughout the day so far, I mean, I just can't wait to see kind of like what has been the most popular. I mean, we only get a chance to see a snapshot of it on the stream, but we have a ton of players here.
We have a lot of players here in day 1, and there's a lot of rounds to go. But of course, that gives those day 2 players a little bit of information to try and play around with, right? And to go back to the point we were making just before we took the break, do you mix up your team? Like, if you've bought a team that you think dealt with a certain meta game, right? Like, maybe you prepped for, just an example, Palkia Ice Rider. You thought, all right, the field's going to be littered with Palkia Ice Rider. If you bought a hard counter to that, and you see none of it, would you make the panic change and go, ooh, it's time for team number 2, and hopefully you've got it with you and you've prepped it and it's ready to go? But a lot to think about as we do get to take a look at the metagame a little bit in 2 different lights, and I think that's really, really cool.
That's something we were talking about before going into the break, right? Is it smart to look at the metagame for day number 1 and use that to inform your decision for day number 2? You can do that if you are a day 2 player, but is it worth it? I mean, especially when you can also change your team from day 1 to day 2.
And if you're
Begs the question.
If you're a day 2 player, do you turn up with, let's say, 3 teams, and then you go, okay, I'm going to play this, you take a look at the day 1 metagame, you talk to people out in the field and say, you know what, Let's see what happens when it comes to how these players are going to be selecting Pokemon, what's winning, what's making it into day 2 as well. Not only what is present, but what's winning is very, very important. And then maybe you pick one of those 3 teams based on that information that you've got at home. And that's really, really easy to do. The downside of that, though, something you touched on a little bit earlier, is, well, if you are bringing and prepping 3 teams, well, will you have the same number of games in there? Some of these trainers that are in day 2 have been playing teams at North American internationals, European internationals. They're pushing 500, 600, even 1,000 games on in some cases. And that muscle memory, that practice, that understanding of every matchup is so important. So would you give that up for the chance for Meta Read? It's such a tough decision to make. It truly
目前这支是第5
and
支。
especially because sometimes the things just don't go in your favor. You could get a critical hit.
总共有几个鱼啊？我都忘记。
Or you could miss a move.
目前这个是第5支，我记得好像有10几个吧。
Series 12 are not 100% accurate. We look at Groudon, we look at Kyogre, and what their signature moves are in terms of that accuracy. We've definitely seen some misses. Even with Zacian and Player Rough, like, it happens on the stream. And so you kind of have to mitigate that as well, and just the random variance that can happen in a game.
There's definitely tough decisions to be made when it comes to what do you select as your full move pool. Even on some of these Pokemon that are, as some would say, solved and understood, is there room for something a little bit exciting? Let's take Groudon, for example. Yes, Precipice Blades is a fantastic move. It does a huge amount of damage, but there is the liability to miss, and you could argue maybe you have to start looking at the Earthquake. Maybe that's the difference maker when you just need a guaranteed hit on both Pokemon on the opposing side. Maybe something like the Earthquake is there as a choice. I mean, I know people have tried it a little bit in the past as well, giving it different options depending on how they feel it needs to target the opposing side of the field. It's certainly not an easy decision to be making, though, and that's something that the top trainers will have put 100, 200, 300 games on coming into this tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we're definitely going to just kind of talk about that a little bit more as we get later on in the tournament today. But we are ready for another matchup here for round number 3. So let's go ahead and kick it over to the stage so we can introduce to you your next players for the second Swiss round number 3 match. I'm pretty excited about this one because, I think we are getting a nice look at some of the best players in the World Championships and just seeing another international matchup. This is why I love the internationals and Worlds.
It's really nice being able to cross the regions. Of course, we do cross region a little bit when we are at the international championships, but Worlds comes with this extra caveat, right, where we throw in players from literally all around the world. North America and European internationals predominantly loaded with North American and European, and then a little bit of maybe something like the Latin America player base who sometimes pop up a little bit. And then, of course, you mix in some of those Oceania players as well, which usually have quite a long way to go to really cover it. But we can start taking a look at our players on stream there. You may recognize some of them. They are, of course, going to be from North America and Europe as well, as we do have Dylan Salvanera versus Matty Morgan. So,
对话一下就结束了，超爽。边弄边看漫画，还边看转播，爽爆！
Just playing to get into day number 2, and that's the goal here. You are at 2-0 if you're being featured in this round. That's a very, very good start. But there's definitely a lot more tournament to go, and with that in mind, you are going to have to push on.
两个都是终于没有 JP 组了。
And you've got a long afternoon ahead of you.
Yeah, and so I want to talk a little bit more about some of these players' accomplishments and their journeys throughout VGC in the past few years. Because, when you're looking at players like Maddie, we're looking at kind of players that have more recently aged up into the Masters division. We got top 4 at NAIC as a senior, and he also got top 4 at the Malmo Regionals in 2020. And so, you're kind of looking at him making a bit of a comeback now, having a bit more of a gap between one of these top performances and kind of looking forward to this World Championships. But on the other side of things as well, when you look at Dylan Salvanera, it's also kind of like in that same region of years where he's had consistent results. He was the champion for the Virginia Regionals, top 16 at the Dallas Regionals in 2017.
哇，代川跟库拉，哇，完美的对决。
Really excited about what they decide to bring to this matchup, and we can go ahead and see it on the screen.
I'm so glad we talked about Rinya's son a little bit earlier today.
It's one of those teams that you knew we were going to see.
哇，这场应该是会打得很刺激哦。
You can have your moment, and we'll get on with this one. But it's going up in a very different matchup. Both trainers leaning on the Zacian, but a monster difference when it comes to the other restricted. One Kyogre, one Groudon. We get to start the discussion and start settling which of those is the best to go with it. They're both carrying the Incineroar, but from there it goes completely differently with a combination of Thundurus, Whimsicott, and Amoonguss for Dylan Salvanera, and then you're going to have the Charizard, Grimmsnarl, and Gastrodon for Matty. I know a lot of people started to pivot away and lost a little bit of faith, honestly.
我觉得对方会火喵跟左边会火喵跟贪闪先散吧，后手是盖跟红妖精，或者是参想跟雷电影。
Even an unfavorable looking matchup like the Kyogre and the Thundurus can be navigated.
Yeah, and that's something I wanted to bring up here about Dylan Salvanera, is that he did actually get a top 16 at the Milwaukee Regional Championships this year, and that's kind of one of the more recent regionals in North America. And in most of the top performances he's had this season, it has been with that Zacian and that Kyogre, so you know there is a ton of familiarity there. You've just kind of changed up a little bit of the supporting Pokemon that make that restricted duo shine. And so it is going to be the classic battle of whether the Groudon, the Kyogre. It's going to be intense as we get into game number 1 here between these two players.
I definitely think that the Zacian and the Kyogre team had a really good end to the season, right? When people started to pivot away from the sun, didn't feel as confident in it, felt really, really good, honestly, being able to see that come to the fore and provide something a little bit different. It did go through iterations, as we were talking about. What item do you have on the Kyogre? What item is going to be the most impactful for the way your game is being played? But the leads are on the field. It's going to be Incineroar and Thundurus for Dylan, and then, of course, the Charizard and the Grimmsnarl for Matty. So this Thundurus didn't get any of the Defiant boosts. That's probably something that's you wanted to see the opposing Incineroar, but Matty being very smart and avoiding that one. But of course, the Thundurus still has a really nice matchup.
哇，这么早就开始聚了。
Charizard, and being able to catch it with what will now become a Max Lightning could be very, very important if Dylan can stop something like the light screen going up, which there is a very useful option in that.
电喷火龙吗？
That Max Lightning is going to cause a whole lot of problems.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. I mean, you have the Grimmsnarl on the
他喷火龙应该会守
other
住哦。
side, and Grimmsnarls in
诶，
a
他喷火龙也
lot
聚。
of the more recent meta have actually had a bunch of options to be able to slow down opposing Thundurus. It's almost a requirement at this point that Grimmsnarl runs something like a Trick or an Iron Ball or a Lagging Tail, just to be able to have that ability to control the speed just a touch more, and that may give Charizard a chance if that is something that Matty has. But Incineroar is just going to stop that. We're going to see the fake out right into the Grimmsnarl, so we're not going to see what that Grimmsnarl has decided to do. But on the other side of things, Dylan will go for a huge max airstream into the Grimmsnarl, but it will not be enough to get the knockout with that speed. Very important.
Speed's definitely going to help out in the long run because there is a chance that this Charizard max airstreams. Not this turn though, as the G-Max Wildfire connects into the Thundurus, and that is going to start causing problems throughout the game with that residual damage between turns, of course. Doesn't look as impactful when the Thundurus is Dynamax, and of course the Incineroar not getting affected by it, but something like that Whimsicott, like that Zacian, is going to take really big damage between turns. I think maybe when you look at Dylan's side of the field, he's thinking, you know what, this Charizard's going to be so scared of my Max Lightning, I know what I'll do. I'll throw a Max Airstream down into that Grimmsnarl and see if I can get a knockout there, and of course the speed boost. But the Charizard playing very confidently. I do like this from Matty. I do think this team is so
下一回合很重要啊。他的火喵如果换下去
is so helpful as this Thundurus looks very easy to knock out now as Thundurus forced into some defense.
守住。
Yeah, you're going to see the Max Guard here. But not before you also see the
我们要
Grimmsnarl
换下去
for
吗
a reflect. And so looking, of course, at the physical attack damage that Dylan is pressuring on the opposite side, you definitely want to try to mitigate as much of that as possible. Flare Blitz, though, that will be Grimmsnarl's last move as it does get knocked out. And we will start to see the Max Rockfall, but the Max Guard there, of course, blocking that damage.
Yep, and then a little bit of residual damage. The Thundurus is still able to hold on, you know, would need to get caught by another attack.
那库拉多一定会上来吧？
has to wonder when is this max lightning?
还是他要换参想？
If you ignore it, that's going to be a problem.
参想上来，然后看对方，然后切库拉多回来吧。
Now that Thunderous, if that Thunderous didn't have the max airstream boost, you know what? That was just going to get completely tidied up by this Zacian here, and at least it's got a fighting chance now of being able to do that. The Incineroar's already on the board as well, so you are going to have to switch it out, switch it back in if you want to get that Intimidate. There is, of course, the option to make sure you land a parting shot. That would be very, very helpful as well, but that's still a bit of a slower turn than you would think. And finally, for this Thunderous, it lands the max lightning into Charizard. But you know what?
巨电应该死了吧？
Yeah, that is going to be a ton of super effective damage. Not enough to get the knockout, but we are going to see, of course, that electric train. But what's this? Charizard is a weakness policy that just got activated by that max lightning, and now that Charizard is going to be super difficult to deal with. Incineroar also getting knocked out to the Sacred Sword, and it's time for Charizard to shine. Max Airstream here to max the speed boost, but you don't even need it anymore when that Thunderous is just going to get knocked out.
That is absolutely huge, and a very early reveal of one of those meta adaptations that has been coming to the fore as we approach the World Championships. I know a few of us were enjoying the local cuisine yesterday, and of course, while discussing the tournament, somebody mentioned that the weakness policy Charizard was something that people were really feeling coming into this tournament, because you know what? If it's on the field, it's Dynamax. If it's Dynamax, it can take a hit. The most common hit it's going to be taking is something that's super effective, scare it. The Thunderous being quite popular so far, I think, is certainly a concern. With that in mind, you know, that weakness policy just means you can max Airstream every turn, still get knockouts because the damage is monstrous, and then go from there. The big thing right now, of course, is this Kyogre has come in, revealed itself very, very early, and I can see a world where it's not going to be in a great position quite soon. The Groudon has to be in the back for Matty, and now he's knocked out the front too. He's just going to be able to take away the rain for the rest of the game. Of course, even before we get there, this Charizard Zacian have a speed boost and can just start doing as much damage as possible, maybe pave the way for Groudon to clean up.
I think that's the one thing that I'm looking at, is the interaction of speeds between the two Zacian that are on the field, but also I think no matter if it's the Gastrodon or the Groudon in the back, Matty has a pretty good answer to that Kyogre either way.
I mean, it's really able to show off some options here, and if it's the Gastrodon, I'd be a little bit shocked. I think, you know, it's very rare that we see trainers leave their restricted, and I don't know if Gastrodon's as justifiable, but in the face of a Kyogre, it certainly is. The Zacian on Dylan's side, playing it safe, knowing it's one of the back two, has to be smart. We're going to see exactly how much this Charizard can do in the rain, which is usually not so favorable. Here it is, number 9, a Hurricane into the Kyogre. Will it get the confusion?
Oh, nope, it's going to go for the Origin Pulse. It will be a double connect as well. And so that Charizard, of course, that Hurricane will be what it has been able to accomplish. Zacian, though, still sitting on the field. Matty's fourth and final Pokemon, as there is still the G-Max Wildfire chip on the field, and Kyogre gets so low.
Yeah, that's the last turn.
现在对方库拉多，我觉得应该是海兔吧，海兔或库拉多。
Able to, of course, bring in the last Pokemon confirmation that it's the Groudon. Of course, that Kyogre's rain now gone.
对方也没有急剧了，天气被盖掉了。
It can't look at something like the Water Spout. If it does hit the Origin Pulse, it's going to be in the sun, and it's not going to be particularly.
有点麻烦呢。
So a lot of options to think about, and I think the Groudon should just be able to clear up here.
It should, especially when you know that you can't switch out the Groudon, the Kyogre anymore.
我觉得对方的
and when both of your weather setters on the field and Groudon comes in late, Matty does have the advantage there. But you're still taking as much time as possible in these final few turns just to get as much information as possible. And we will see the Zacian. Let's go ahead and clean up the Kyogre. That is one restricted down. It's just the Zacian left here for Dylan. And Kyogre does get a chance to maybe come back in this second game, but it's also going to be a Groudon show here. Zacian for Dylan does use Behemoth Blade.
但他的参想还是死了，
This is a tough one.
除非密死， 除非密死，不然真的是不太可能。
This is not the 1v1 situation you want to see as the Zacian. It's probably one of the worst Pokemon in the format, especially when it's single targeting. With the Precipice Blades, and there is the easy knockout, really nicely done by Maddie Morgan to hold on to the Groudon to the very, very end and just clean up the game with it.
Yep. You have to, in this matchup, think about the positioning of both of your restricted Pokemon
and also just the Kyogre versus the Groudon. I mean, that's a tale as old as time in a lot of our metas, but seeing how both of these players end up navigating that is super, super interesting to watch. I think Maddie also just put on a very good show of how you can change up those different tech choices on something like the Rinya Sun. Remember, we saw the Chardy Berry from Chongqing Peng. We've also ended up seeing a bunch of other adjustments to just the spreads of all of these Pokemon, and now we're seeing the weakness policy Charizard as something that's coming through. And that definitely, I think, makes Dylan question how to deal with that Pokemon moving forward.
I really, really like as well that he was able to just go for it with the Charizard, even in the face of a Dynamax Thundurus. Matty sat there and said, you know what, I'm just going to need to get the damage down and knock out this front pair. I want your Kyogre locked in, even without the Gastrodon, saying once your Kyogre's locked in, I feel safe being able to wrap this one up with just the weather advantageous Groudon. So being able to win that way feels really good, and there's still options in the locker. Of course, there was that, you know, Grimmsnarl that was, I don't know if it was super important. Of course, it helped out with some of the damage from, you know, being able to set up that Reflect, but I don't even think it really applied too much of a threat anyway. I do think that maybe that Grimmsnarl could be swapped. That could potentially become a Gastrodon, and I think there's plenty of options on Matty's side to keep digging and keep showing off what this team can do. But the crux of it is he saved the most important Pokemon when it comes to weather control, the Groudon, saved that for last. Didn't even have it in against next to the Charizard at any time. That Charizard was just doing all of that damage through obviously the weakness policy and just being a Gigantamax Charizard.
Yeah, that's definitely so true. I mean, I love how we've seen so many trainers kind of utilize these signature Gigantamax moves, especially when it comes to having that extra residual damage. Charizard, maybe some Blastoise we could see at this tournament. Venusaur, of course, with Vine Lash. And we can't forget about Colossal and how that really did sweep some competitions here. Don't give me that look.
I think it's time to let the Colossal go.
Don't. I was just bringing it up. I wasn't saying it was.
那这样他晴天比较优势，他带那个香菇有点。
And then you thought yes, Colossal, and then remember. Kyogre and Groudon exist in this format, and it does make it
威力有点太大，
mad respect to them for watching.
可是也是确定他没有个。
I'll even say it. I think Blastoise is a stretch. I think Charizard number 1,
I don't know about
Venusaur number 2. I've seen.
但也确定他是没有那个还原死的那个果实。
Not bringing either of these silly choices. Just nice standard picks for their team compositions. It looks like the leads are getting a run back here.
Yeah, absolutely. Both Maddie and Dylan are going to have the same leads. But really then it comes down to what happens in turn 1 and turn 2. Charizard just got insurmountable value in that first game. And so when you run away with it like that, you definitely have to kind of consider as well. Thundurus just can't go for the Max Lightning anymore unless you know that you have enough damage to follow up to be able to knock out that Charizard before we can utilize that weakness policy.
The Max Lightning not getting the knockout because of the Reflect, it just means, you know, maybe things change a little bit for Dylan here, right? You are landing that fake out on the Grimmsnarl again turn 1. That's, I think, the safest option because you know the Charizard's going to Gigantamax. But you need to capitalize, right? You need to capitalize on that turn and say, you know what, I'm going to Max Lightning you now. I'm confident that without the Reflect, I'm going to be able to get the knockout. It's a bit ambitious, but I respect it. And then being able to say, you know, if you don't get the knockout, though, you've caused yourself a massive problem with the weakness policy. So I think this turn decision comes down to how much does Dylan know his calculations on what is going to get knocked out here? You know, you've got to be respectful of that. And without the Reflect, can you just deal with that Charizard early doors? Will the Charizard maybe max guard and just say, you know what, I'm going to wait for that Reflect until I feel confident being able to play this game? That could be a nice adaptation. I loved in game 1 that Matty didn't play that obvious max guard, but now might be the time to throw it out and say, hey, let's mix it up from game 1. Let's see if I can catch you out and waste a turn of the Dynamax from the Thundurus.
I mean, knowing how much experience Dylan has had with the Zacian and the Kyogre restricted pair, I think that Dylan for sure knows what kind of calculations will be necessary here. But Grimmsnarl just kind of going for the Reflect. There was not a fake out from this Incineroar this time around, meaning it was going for something else that we will see a bit later in this turn. But the Max Airstream will just go ahead and do a chunk of damage into that Charizard. And
you're now just kind of maybe hoping that your Thunderous survives for 2 more turns so you can get through this Reflect. But the parting shot as well really could help here, knowing how much that Charizard was able to do in that first game. You just dropped its special attack by 1.
I love that adaptation actually from Dylan, being able to use the Max Airstream again to get your Incineroar out, get the Kyogre in, get control of the weather before the Charizard attacks, and that's going to be really, really big here. And of course, you know, yes, the damage is going to be limited, but, you know, now you're forced into maybe throwing out something like the Max Airstream to keep up. I like that Matty has done that, but it means you're not landing that G-Max Wildfire.
Yeah, but on top of the Incineroar switch out here as well, you're also looking at the fact that Incineroar can switch back in the face of something like the Zacian or the Groudon, which is something that Dylan didn't get a chance to do to have that Intimidate drop in the previous game. And so you have to look at that as well, where Matty might feel forced into a position where you've got to switch in the Groudon, and maybe you can get ahead of that.
It's a really nice adaptation from Dylan in so many ways. Not wasting the fake out on the Grimmsnarl. I mean, in game number 1, he set up the Reflect anyway, so you may as well let him have it now and then go from there. Charizard forced into the Max Guard right now, waiting for this Grimmsnarl trick to probably be more important in this one, as Thundurus obtains the lagging tail there. Thundurus does go for another Max Airstream, maybe worried about the Max Lightning. That's where the Max Guard came through, as Kyogre, yeah, throws out Origin Pulse, and in the rain, this is going to do huge damage to this Grimmsnarl, which it does connect with.
Yep, it's not going to be a knockout though. It's going to be still surviving through that, which means that Grimmsnarl gets a chance to do one more thing, and at least.
I think Dylan's put so many better positions for himself on the board this time than he did in game number 1. Now Matty is faced with a really tough call, right? You're also against the special attacker, so the light screen is something you want, but you also might need control of the weather. Not now, because of course you have just seen that Kyogre leave the field, but what do you go with? Do you just set up the screen and play out the whole game with screens, or do you try and get that, you know, something like that Groudon in to land a massive G-Max Wildfire with the boost to make up for that parting shot drop from earlier?
Ooh, that's really unfortunate the way that the speeds interacted here, because I feel like Dylan would love if the Incineroar had caught the Groudon switch in that he might have been expecting, but Incineroar came in first, so the Intimidate already happened. Now Groudon gets in scot-free, and you've got the weather set up here, and despite the fact that Incineroar should resist this damage, you're still taking quite a bit, and you've set up that chip once again. Thundurus, though, just trying to give some type of advantage over to Dylan in terms of speed, will get that Charizard to half health.
But Dylan has a massive speed advantage now. You know, the Thundurus is sat there with 3 Max Airstreams. That's
速度加1，为什么他要先打那个？打火喵那边。
You know, as long as you can land the Wild Charge, which I don't think is going to be that big a concern, there's no threat of the Groudon switching. You can deal with the Charizard without having to worry about the weakness policy, and I like this adaptation from Dylan. Do not throw an electric attack at the Charizard while it's Dynamax and behind screens. I'm pretty sure even with the Reflect, that Thundurus is feeling pretty good about its chances, and this Incineroar gets a lot of value.
那这时候只要把火苗退回去，他们的优势就没了。
I have very fast parting shots, as we saw in you know, turn number 1.
除非他后手带海兔了。
Get the fake out back in for later, and the potential follow-up intimidates as well. So a lot going for Dylan in this turn. A complete turnaround from game number 1.
Really depends on how that Incineroar is trained, though, because Incineroar is still a pretty slow Pokemon, all things considered.
Well, the Charizard did get a speed boost for itself as well, so that it's not going to be able to outspeed the Charizard, but it would definitely be able to catch that Groudon, because all we saw was Max Airstream, Max Guard, Max Wildfire, so this Groudon actually no boosts from any of the Max boosts, and that's usually when you really want to boost up.
Ooh, well, the fake out though. Grimmsnarl is just going to switch in to be able to eat that, as Charizard going for the Blast Burn. That will be a knockout onto the Thundurus, and that really does mean that Dylan's kind of forced in this position. Like, what kind of damage do you put on the board? Do you put your Kyogre down, and is that going to be enough? Or do you bring in Zacian that is having to deal with the sun here, and also a Charizard in its face?
I don't think you can put
然后如果对方的长矛有麻痹，然后丢这种参翔，哦，参翔直接死去。
You pick these off, make him bring the Groudon, do the reverse, right, of exactly what he did to you in game 1, where you go, you know what, I'm going to win in this one. The speed boosts are completely null and void at that point. I mean, the Charizard still has a speed boost, of course, making sure, even though that Thundurus was trying to catch up in speed, we do have to remember about that lagging tail that was switched on earlier. You know, while the Thunderous was boosting up. Lagging tail means it doesn't get that chance. And I like that Charizard takes advantage of the sun with the blast burn. Just doesn't have to worry too much, of course, about some of its big moves. As Zacian can just quick attack here, you know, that's going to help out a little bit. Make sure that Grimmsnarl doesn't get the opportunity to play. Charizard doesn't get to play this turn, so that gets knocked out. And that horrible last two situation with your ground on in would be a problem. But the solar power is going to get it.
Oh, I mean, that's definitely what Dylan is hoping for, just at least a knockout there. And so it feels good that at least the solar power residual is able to short up the knockout onto the Charizard. This does force Maddie down to his final two Pokemon for this game. And when you know in the back it's going to at least be the Groudon, you see the Zacian on the field too. I think Dylan's feeling pretty good that he is going to have the weather advantage at some point in this game.
There's a very quick way to get the weather advantage too, and that's pivot out the Incineroar, maybe with a hard switch or a parting shot. The Intimidate on the way back in is going to be max value with both of them being physical attackers. So Dylan just has to maneuver this game. I mean, at some point, the big thing is just
这一回合还没结束，还在那边king。
able to capitalize on that. But, you know, you've got to be careful. The big thing here, though, the Groudon is so threatening to both of these Pokemon. You've got to be confident you can clean up.
And also, like, the Incineroar actually didn't get that many boosts. So you actually, have to go for Protect here. And that's really smart, knowing that the Zacian is pretty fast Pokemon overall. And you're going to see Maddie is just going to go ahead and miss the Sacred Sword because of the Protect on the Incineroar. And that means it's taking Behemoth Blade damage here from Dylan Zacian. It still hangs on, but Groudon, you're hoping for a miss here, goes into the Protect, but it will connect onto the Zacian as well.
Yeah, I think you need that right here. Being able to get that knockout is absolutely huge, and we're now down to the 2v2. The critical hit, probably not too relevant in that one, as Zacian is very regularly knocked out by the non-critical hit version. But the Incineroar saving itself for this turn, realizing that, you know what, there's more it can do, and something like, you know, being able to tidy up is big. I mean, its Flare Blitz isn't going to be super huge, but it can just sit on the field and parting shot if it needs to. Of course, the Kyogre has a fantastic matchup here against the Groudon. The Kyogre has taken a little bit of damage, though, and that's going to be concerning when it comes to some of these numbers, particularly if it misses any of its attacks.
Oh, especially if we see, like, Play Rough. I mean, that just could be a thing. And we've definitely seen Play Rough just do a lot into opposing Kyogre before. Even if it's holding something like an Assault Vest, that's not going to be able to save it from something that's a physical attack.
I think as well, this Kyogre's in a sticky situation because it's just below that threshold of where, you know, Origin Pulse is more valuable than Water Spout, and being below that really limits your options. So this Kyogre playing it safe on this turn. The Zacian going for the Sacred Sword into Kyogre is big here.
Yeah, Incineroar just gets to go for the Flare Blitz. It is going to be in the rain, but the Zacian is so low that it does get the knockout. And so that means that this Groudon, even if it does end up taking out this Incineroar, the Kyogre is just usually a faster Pokemon. You get a big reveal here, though, that Incineroar is going to be Shukaberry as its held item, and it still hangs on despite that. Wow.
That's mad value on the Shukaberry there, being able to stick around it from half health. Really, really important, as this Groudon just isn't going to be able to close this one out. I mean, the Kyogre should just move first and catch it. As long as it hits, of course, we do have to caveat that. As long as it hits, it'll be absolutely fine. And that's something that I think even when it comes down to, you know, the single target, maybe that opens up options for Dylan in this one because it is still in the rain. So yeah, pivoting back to the Water Spout. I like that he forces it into this single target situation. Really,
惨呐，有够惨呐。
Once again to game number 3 here.
Yeah, in those final moments as well, even if
我只能说这一场运气很好。我只能这样讲。只能说这一场运气非常好啊，没有第二句话。他原本都快输了。
As soon as it's single target, the number changes drastically, right? You know, even though it's less damage, it's still more than enough into a single target Groudon there. So feeling very, very comfortable in that one. You know, you weren't worried about having to pick up the Zacian as well because you pivoted so nicely in the previous turn to say, you know what, I'm just going to catch it with a Flare Blitz in the rain, which is something that you have to know about. You know, Dylan thinking very, very long and hard about that one. That turn was slightly longer, but definitely thinking that, you know, even in the rain, I'm going to pick up the knockout there, feeling pretty good. So it's going to be game number 3. I do think Dylan made some fantastic changes in game number 2 there, being able to pivot away from a really kind of sluggish start. Yes, he got caught with the lagging tail. Yes, Matty was able to set up both light screen and reflect. The game went so long, Dylan was able to play a lot more around that Incineroar, which was really, really.
反正能刷几只就刷几只，大概20分钟刷一只吧。
The matchup a little bit as you go just seemed to work out a little bit better, I think, for Dylan Salvanera. And you know, I think Matty, you know, once he got derailed from that game 1 plan, felt a step behind throughout the whole game.
What I think is interesting is that, you know, Protect isn't a super common option usually on.
而且为什么背景要放一只超梦？难道是在暗示什么吗？超梦的新形态，超冰结晶，超越冰结晶的结晶。
Does that change anything going into the matchup, knowing that Matty's going to have to play around that now?
It's one of those things we were talking about in the previous game, actually, right? Is, you know, what dark type move do you take on Incineroar? And in this case, Dylan actually going with none as the preferred option outside of Parting Shot, which is a damaging move. So, you know, being able to take the classics, Fake Out and Flare Blitz, being able to then take Parting Shot, but Protect as well, means you've got to be feeling good about other matchups. And in this matchup, it's absolutely vital. It's absolutely essential to be able to Protect, because while Matty was trying to force a situation where he was just targeting 1 Pokemon in the Kyogre, what Dylan really nicely did was protect very, very wisely, and then force himself. Took a little bit longer, but he protected on 2 back-to-back
我觉得开场直接
2v1 situation where you know, it was just Kyogre and Incineroar.
还是长矛啦，长矛跟那个长矛跟喷这样比较实在。因为如果他那个盖欧卡上来，你还可以换固。
You know, feeling really good, and we did say at the beginning of the day, you know, what item does the Kyogre take? Well, you know, some people really love the Assault Vest on it, but I think that Protect is so valuable.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about that more later, but we have definitely seen kind of a return to some type of damage boosting item like the Life Orb or the Mystic Water, and so we haven't seen the recoil. I'm going to kind of assume here that it's going to be Mystic Water that that Kyogre is holding, but it is game number 3, and this will be the deciding factor between who is going to keep that perfect record heading into Swiss round number 4, and it's what we've seen and come to expect, I think, in this match.
It's definitely the smartest lead for both of them, and it just works. It's not too aggressive, it's not too defensive. There's options on both sides. It's nicely balanced, and you both have a nice Dynamax option to lean into early on, which both trainers have been doing in turn number 1. I know we look at it in some other games where maybe a late Dynamax is a big pivot, but I just can't see that happening in this game with, once again, the Thunderous Dynamaxing. There we go, the Dynamax coming through on what I hope is the Charizard. If it's the Grimmsnarl, we're going to have a very different game that I don't think either of us are particularly prepared for.
Unless it's a Gigantamax Grimmsnarl, that would might make things a little interesting here. But no, it is going to be that Charizard. And seeing a run back of these turn 1 Dynamaxes, you look at the teams and you kind of think, like, do you have to go for this? And yeah, you kind of do. But this time around, we are going to see flinch from the fake out. And
no reflect on this turn.
Nope.
That's big.
No, it's definitely big. I mean, look at how much damage that Max Airstream is going to do from this Thunderous, and the speed as well. Matty might have to go for a Max Airstream also just to try to match that and keep pace.
It's something that a lot of trainers do think about, but the G-Max Wildfire follows up right away, heading into that Thunderous, doing a good amount of damage, but this looks like game 1 all over again, right? The turn has been exactly the same so far. There's a little bit of residual damage from the G-Max Wildfire, and we're right back to where we are. Of course, things did get a little bit different. Charizard went for the Max Guard, while the Incineroar, while the Thunderous decided to target into it, and the Grimmsnarl set up the Reflect. So there could be some differences there. Oh, the Thunderous targeted the Grimmsnarl, and of course the Incineroar wasn't able to do anything in that one. So that is what I'm looking at. Are we going to run back that turn? Is there a world where this Charizard leaves itself available to potentially get Max Lightninged? And if so, is that Max Lightning enough through a potential Reflect as well? A lot of questions to be answered here, and this for me could be a very.
我觉得直接巨焰的吧，
much that Max Lightning did to the Charizard.
直接巨火下去了。
And it wasn't
enough,
and I don't think with the Reflect being active now it would be
大巨电
either.
吗？
But it's the trick. I mean, Grimmsnarl, it got faked out that first turn, but it's still going to get value here as the Max Guard from the Charizard will protect it from that Max Lightning. And the Flare Blitz as well. Look at that. Dylan was actually double targeting the Charizard, knowing that that Max Lightning by itself
两边都打同一个位置撞到。
And that's a really big read from Dylan that just hasn't gone his way. Seeing it in game number 1, knowing that the Charizard Max Guards in this situation, you know, just so the Grimmsnarl can do something is something that you have to think, well, what's he going to do? Just reflect and attack? Knowing, of course, that calculation from game number 1. You know that after the reflect, you can take the max lightning. So really smart there from Maty to put up another max guard, then set up the trick. Now honestly, this Thunderous is not going to be able to cause as many problems. It's not going to be able to capitalize on those max airstream boosts that it had, and it's forced into the max guard. Really nicely done there, as of course this Charizard gets the option to throw out pretty much whatever it wants. There's the reflect with the prankster ability, and Charizard's max rockfall does go towards the Thunderous, so not able to get a knockout there, but the residual damage has started to add up, and this Thunderous looking real easy to pick up.
双方的集聚都结束了。但是看后手有什么。
and you're not getting any type of damage, you're still getting into that knockout range. Like Thunderous is quite low now. Incineroar still has the ability to go for some, maybe a parting shot to pivot around, but it's such a dangerous and precarious position because you don't want to be that player that gets stuck with the weather that you can't change.
What I really like here, just thinking about it a little bit further back, is the way that Maty changed up the game plan next to the max guard. And I think that's being really important now, right? As this Thunderous feels pretty much out the game. And that, as you say, can force the sticking weather. The biggest issue here is, can you get rid of the Incineroar early, or maybe the Zacian if it comes back?
那现在雷云收回去也不好说。我喵直接用大声咆哮吗？还是漏下狠话？
Run through everything. There's move 4. It is the light screen, so this Kyogre's going to have an even tougher time late in the game. As Incineroar, doesn't have the sun, is going to be able to land that Flare Blitz on the Charizard.
多消一点血就对了。
Not a lot of damage, to say the least.
No, and the Incineroar just goes for the ancient power as well. That is what that max rockfall will be based off of. Super effective. Does not get any boosts though, and so the wild charge will be enough to secure the knockout. Especially knowing
为什么他不打雷电影？雷电影应该是可以送得下去的。
But that wildfire damage as well. That is it for.
他是想要这样1换1哦，可是这样1换1没有比较好。
Maybe you get the boost from the ancient power and you feel like everything's going your way. It's not the case, but at the end of the day, you trade your X Dynamax Pokemon for their X Dynamax Pokemon, right? And then you're putting yourself in a Zacian game. Now, the big difference here is, really, if you are going to play the Zacian,
那他还有一只应该就是盖欧卡。
light screen set up, so that's going to help a little bit.
那这火苗应该会换回去换盖欧卡。
I mean, honestly, it's got Precipice Blades. That's looking real good into this matchup. And the thing I don't like about when you're the Kyogre player is it would feel really cool if you could just switch the Kyogre in and avoid a Precipice Blades, but that damage is actually preposterous, and that makes it sometimes a little bit difficult to deal with it here. So a lot of work to do for this Groudon, and the Groudon is going to be able to start causing problems. Of course, the Incineroar could just switch out manually. Then there's certainly some other options here for Dylan, but we're in for a really close end to this game 3 here in round 3.
These are the next few turns these players have to get right. They might need to make some reads here, but it is going to be a Grimmsnarl switch out.
It's kind of done all its work.
Wow, the Gastrodon finally making an appearance in this matchup right here. It's Noah the Zacian. So one of those restrictions for Maddie is actually going to be left at home. Incineroar goes for the Flare Blitz. And while that Groudon, it's going to take a bit of damage here. Oh my gosh, the burn! That's huge! Now this Precipice Blade's damage is not going to do nearly as much as Maddie was going to be hoping for. The Shuka Berry for sure going to keep this Incineroar alive.
This Groudon is looking real lightweight on the damage now. The Shuka Berry making it look even worse there, but it's going to get caught with a little bit of damage between turns.
真的是晒耶！不然他这2只早就死去了，哇死定！
We're going back to that similar to game 1. Dylan won that
这样打参想很麻烦。
a Kyogre at the end, and bringing the Gastrodon here feels really,
只能说晒啦。 打死量在哪里？快点出来！
I do have an answer to it. The Groudon feeling pretty useless at this juncture, being forced out. Maybe, you've got to ask less of it at this point. You've got to say all you can do is a little bit of chip damage at the end, and this Gastrodon getting just caught by the play roughs. That's going to be a lot of damage as the parting shot. It would have been insult to injury on the Groudon, but at least Grimmsnarl comes in and isn't so affected by that.
Yeah, I mean, and Grimmsnarl too, I think you're hoping that maybe it'll stick around to be able to keep some of the screens up and running on the field, but Kyogre now does get a chance to make an appearance as well, but that Gastrodon makes this matchup so much trickier now because you can't go for the Water Spout that we saw before unless you want to
or you feel comfortable enough giving a boost over to the Gastrodon and knowing that you have a way to shut it down before it gets out of hand.
But the Gastrodon took so much damage that turn from the play rough, and I mean, without the reflect, that would have been a whole lot more, and definitely looking at a knockout as well. So a really tough situation, and I think having that burn on the Groudon means you're feeling really, really good as the Kyogre player, right? You know, that Zacian's going to be able to take a Precipice Blades, especially spread damage, especially burned. And if you are worried about it, which I don't know if Dylan is, you're just able to switch in the Intimidator as well to really lock that one up. The Gastrodon is being asked to do all the work, and my question right now is, what can this Grimmsnarl offer? It has a Life Orb from the earlier trick, so you don't really want to give that one away. You know, your screens are still up.
这下他的盖欧卡只能用结冰的冷冻光束吗？他一定是砍那一个海兔那一边。诶，他先把长矛砍掉，为什么？ 因为防止他再开空间吗？不是啊，开盾啊，不是开空间。
Yeah, it has to. It can't let Gastrodon go for something like the yawn here because there really isn't a good way to pivot out unless you want to just do those manual switches. Knowing though that the Groudon is coming back in, this is actually not a terrible position for Dylan to be in because you can just switch out the Zacian in favor of the Incineroar and get another attack drop on top of the burn damage that is having that Groudon's damage.
I mean, yeah, I think at the moment, you know, the Zacian just being able to seal up the game is really important here. And the Zacian is going to be doing really big amounts of damage to Gastrodon, especially now that Reflect is gone and there's no way to set it up. So while it may be tempting to take the Kyogre out to get weather control, I think honestly at this juncture you can kind of just let it go and let them play in the sun. I mean, it's not like the Charizard is taking advantage of it. And realistically, your Kyogre's not throwing out water-type attacks anyway.
Yeah, well, but you definitely want to make sure that your Zacian doesn't get put to sleep.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, you're going to see that pivot out. Incineroar coming in, the Intimidate animation here. Groudon at this point is just doing such lackluster damage that Maddie is hoping for some type of critical hit. And knowing that you have the Gastrodon on the field that is still pressuring something like the Yawn, you have to go for the Precipice Blades and hope that you can at least knock out the Incineroar here, but it's still not enough. It's hanging on as Gastrodon tries to go for the Yawn into the Kyogre too.
Yeah, Yawn into the Kyogre there, really, really wasted. You know, I don't think it's a big deal on the Incineroar, but at least it would have hit something, or maybe even an Earth Power just to tidy it up. As there goes a little bit more damage down on the Groudon, and the light screen's gone as well. So those Ice Beams from the Kyogre are going to cause more problems. Of course, there is a world where maybe, you know, the Kyogre just says, you know what, I'm going for it anyway. I'll give you the boost on Gastrodon. I don't care about that too much. I'll just knock out the Groudon. Kind of, you know, it's not doing too much anyway, but just make sure you've got this easy 1v1 situation. Zacian versus the Gastrodon with no Reflect, with no Light Screen. Could just tidy it up that way. And if you're worried about the Gastrodon weaving in an attack, another Yawn, well, guess what? Your Incineroar just came in. So you have access to Fake Out, and you're able to just slow it down for that turn. So it could be a very null and void turn, but I still think Dylan completely in the driving seat, just able to do exactly what he wants.
感觉现在右边比较有优势。
Well, the protect here from the Gastrodon.
Okay.
If that was the target of the Fake Out, which it is.
Yep.
Now you have
因为他只能打冷冻光线而已。
go for something, but it's the Ice Beam, and it will target correctly into the Groudon. It brings it pretty low, but Groudon still has a chance to maybe go for some type of damage. Stone Edge.
竟然不是断剑呢？
lackluster here, and Gastrodon
他选什么？
continuing to just get some
大
recovery
地之极吗？
but Kyogre
大地
is
之
still
力。
so healthy.
That might be the weakest Stone Edge I've ever seen. That might be the lowest amount of damage I've ever seen from a Stone Edge. And that is painful to watch from Maddie's side of the field. This Kyogre refuses to give a boost to Gastrodon, just keeps going with the Ice Beams, finally gets rid of that Groudon. And realistically, you know, what's Gastrodon going to do? It's going to put everything to sleep. It's then going to be able to, you know, start Earth powering stuff. But at some point, you're going to get hit by an attack. And that's just something I don't think Gastrodon can deal with. So Dylan playing it very safe by avoiding that. But, you know, it doesn't matter when that Groudon, the big final Pokemon in your team, just isn't able to do anything because it's burned, it's intimidated, it's just getting caught short there, and it's really tough to see as, yeah, Gastrodon, at some point, it's going to get hit by the Zacian.
Well, I think that's what was so smart too about the Incineroar pivot is that
然后他左边一定会换，右边一定会换下去，然后左边守住。
On the field side by side, you know that Gastrodon is one of the slowest Pokemon in the format, so you're gonna outspeed it, no problem. But just, I guess, play it safe. Why not? Get the weather back in your favor, I suppose. Have that fake out pressure, but Zacian here too. Got the Intrepid Sword boost.
It's the most secure board position I've ever seen. If the Gastrodon protects to try and let it go to sleep, then you just fake it out next turn as play rough. No reflect anyway. Dylan Salvanera taking this one in round number 3.
他那个固拉多被那个不是被夺三真的是太亏了。
Both players able to take a game off of each other, and then that adjustment at the end to just get the positioning they needed. That was really masterfully done.
Well, this is one of those matchups that there has been a lot of testing on, right? Not just Kyogre versus Groudon, but I think these specific builds, both paired with the Zacian, are the two most dominant builds for either of those restricted Pokemon that have come from many generations ago. And being able to navigate that is so important. And in game number 1, you know, we saw really excellent play by Maddie Morgan to find that win condition that Rinja-san needs into these matchups. You know, being able to force the Kyogre out early, bring in the sun, take away the Kyogre's rain, and it doesn't look that good in the sun. In game number 2, game number 3, Dylan flips it around a little bit. A lot more work from the Incineroar, which I really
哇，来杯茶，竟然有现场配信的，太夸张了。
Speed boost parting shot is really annoying to play against. It's very problematic, and you feel really disappointed when you attack afterwards and you don't get to go there. You know, game 2 was some great positioning, and in game 3, everything really worked. I think once he got in the driving seat, Dylan played the game out diligently, played it out cleanly, and of course that burn just wraps it up as well. You know, disappointing that we didn't get a closer game, but I still think on overall ball position, Dylan had a lead, and that just made it even more comprehensive.
Well, that's what I was going to bring up, is that I think that burn not happening would have changed that game number 3 a little bit. I mean, we're going to have an analyst desk segment in a little bit, so know that Aaron is going to be able to break that down just a bit further. But still, I think that despite the burn, I think Maddie just, like, the fact that he was resilient, right?
Yep.
Because he was still playing to some of those outs that could happen. And so I think that was, you know, that's what you got to do at the World Championships.
Oh, no, both trainers did a really, really good job of saying, you know what, like, I'm not giving up this game right away. I'm going to be able to try and stick with it and push through. Even in game number 1, right, which Dylan lost, he was able to fight back a little bit and show some of what his team could do. Game 2, both trainers went to the end, and in the same game 3, both trainers went all the way to the end, running their team the absolute, you know, full distance, making sure they got maximum information out of it is really, really good, because that could be information that you learn that helps you in games, you know, 4, 5, 6 in some of these rounds where if you've taken the loss, you've got to be diligent, you want to bounce back, and let's say you run into the same team right away. It feels pretty good if you think, well, all right, I lost against it last round, but I won this game against it. I'm going to take that information and I'm going to be able to play it. You know, let's say you're Dylan. You think, well, okay, I'm not going to be able to burn it every time, but at least now I have 2 games experience where I know how to beat it.
That's true, absolutely. And I think that you still have to look at maybe some of those item choices that might be a bit different, because that can affect how you decide to play out that matchup. But it's just 1 loss. You can still go through and have a successful day number 1, but there is now a smaller margin of error that can happen for these players in order to actually make it on to day 2.
It definitely adds a little bit of pressure, and you know, you've got to take what you learned in that game and use it to bounce back from that issue. I mean, we talked about it at the top of the round a little bit. You know, item choices have been different between a lot of Pokemon, and I like the weakness policy on the Charizard. I do. I think it's really cool. It's really creative. But I think, you know, after that reveal in game number 1, which of course Dylan lost, he still took that piece of information, even though it wasn't super relevant, and he played around it so well in the early turns of the game where they both committed to Dynamax Thundurus, Dynamax Charizard, respectively, being able to avoid that. It's so tempting, right? You see the Charizard and you think, that Max Lightning button is looking real enticing right now.
Because it tells you it's super effective.
I mean, it does. It glows, it pops, and you're like, ooh, it's time to press. Feels really, really good. So that decision-making, absolutely huge, and I think big credit to Dylan on being able to navigate the bounce back, the reverse sweep, if you will.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and head over to the stage to hear from Dylan about how he got that win.
Thanks so much. I am here with Dylan. From your perspective, tell us the story of that series from Game 1.
Game
艾欧
1,
卡
it was
小玩偶，
kind of a
可是你身上
weird
穿的是
experience to
竹篮
sort of
呢
say because I'm
你这样对得起路遥猎杀
I'm
吗？
trying to fake out into the Grimmsnarl, I airstream into it, and then I'm thinking, oh, I'm in a prime position a few turns later to max lightning into the Charizard, and I see that his Zard is weakness policy and how little damage it took behind the reflects, and that's when I knew I kind of maybe had to take a more of a passive approach to games 2 and 3 because
对啊，你手上拿盖欧卡，身上穿那个竹篮跟路遥猎杀，然后你的队伍竟然没有路遥猎杀，你是不是认为他们太弱了？
with my lead, and so what I ended up doing is that I wanted to try and get the parting shot off onto the Charizard and get my Kyogre in where it's raining for the max wildfire because I learned that in Game 1 that my Incineroar actually outspeeds this Charizard after an airstream. So, and I think that I was able to pivot myself into a position where I could win, but all I needed to do was, in the last few turns of that Game 2, I just needed to call whether he was going to Sacred Sword my Incineroar or Kyogre, and me calling that correctly, I was able to win.
Yeah, I mean, it was convincing. It was fun to watch. How are you feeling about your chances overall here at Worlds?
Listen, starting off 3-0 and then having just one on stream, I'm feeling great. But to me, it feels like we're only in round 3. It feels like we would have 5 more rounds. This day's not even halfway done. It feels like it is.
How about your history with competition? What have you done in the past, and what are you hoping to accomplish here?
Honestly, for my goals here, I kind of just want to make day 2, and then I'll go from there. But for my past accomplishments, I've been playing since 2011. I really didn't start getting results until 2014 when I was a senior. And then eventually when around 2017, 2018, when I finally became a master, I started seeing like progress. It wasn't until just now that I'm starting to get on the world stage and, you know.
This is the moment. This is your momentum. That's great. As you look forward in the competition, are there any particular teams or players that you think are going to be a cool challenge for you?
Listen, there's a specific 3 combination of Pokemon that I want to say that's like a
这个采访比较久，因为翻译不用钱吗？
necessarily say what it is right now.
不用付翻译的钱，所以可以采访比较久。
Well, good luck. Thank you so much. And now we're going to head over to Aaron at the analyst desk. Great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I, of course, am joined once again by my good friend Scott Glaza, and we are here to break down the previous round. That was, you know, 2 relatively standard team compositions going up against each other, but there were definitely some adjustments and some surprises throughout that set.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was pretty fun. We got that matchup in 2 of our more promising younger players, and I think it was only a matter of time until we saw that Rinya Sun team. For a moment there, it seemed like you might make it, you know, Rinya fun. We saw the weakness policy, but it seemed like that was the one trick. It's all we got.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, the main course of that set, we saw a little bit of adjusting here and there, right? In the first game, the weakness policy actually activated. It's funny, going into this tournament, people were joking about weakness policy being a thing on Charizard. It turns out it actually was a thing, and I think the end game in Game 1 was quite nice, where it was able to, you know, get a speed boost onto the Charizard, correctly, you know, get the Hurricane onto the Kyogre, and then putting the Groudon really into this nice end game position. But yeah, I think games 2 and 3 where things got a little bit more interesting. I think the end game of Game 2 is where I actually want to break down first a little bit, because it felt like, you know, the Weather War had been lost. Kyogre had actually been able to come out, but it was still kind of a winning position. But then we saw some actually surprises, such as Protect on the Incineroar, and then Incineroar actually critically was also able to like outspeed Charizard after a speed boost in the beginning of the game, thus getting a parting shot off, and then also surviving the Precipice Blades with the Shuka Berry.
Yeah, I mean, I love Protect Incineroar. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, it's good. I don't know if I would use it myself as a player now, but man, the players who can maneuver with it well, it makes such a big difference. Where,
继续说，继续说。
really good. You know, Incineroar may be the best Pokemon that's ever been introduced introduced to VGC, you know, if you don't have those tools of position, it's exploitable. And I think that just that little bit of extra space you get from having a move like Protect to make sure that, you know, you're not exposed to damage at bad times. It makes a big difference when you can use it well.
Yeah, so we can actually pull up the replay right now. This is kind of midway through the second game, right? And so at this point, it felt like Maddie actually may have had a pretty decent advantage. I think in his eyes, it's like, okay, I have the Groudon, I have the Zacian, I'm ready for this end game where even if Kyogre is out and I lose the Weather Ward, like Zacian will be able to do so much damage into the opposing Kyogre where it actually doesn't really matter because a Water Spout won't thus, you know, KO the Groudon, right? However, Protect from Incineroar in this kind of mid-game position, as if we could get the replay, that'd be great. But yeah, the idea is that Protect on Incineroar essentially allows for, you know, what should be a free attack to completely get blown away, and subsequently, you don't just get a ton of free damage across the board immediately. Okay, so here's the replay. Let's just take it back to the beginning of the turn here. So in this position, this is where Protect is huge, right? Because without the Protect, Incineroar, you're just simply threatened by Zacian and Groudon doubling up on that slot, right? So the idea is that, okay, Sacred Sword can go into the Incineroar. You can't really safely switch in Kyogre. Like, Kyogre never wants to take a Precipice Blades, right? And so every time you switch it in against the Groudon, you have to be confident that you can, you know, deal a lot of damage, if not just KO the Groudon outright the next turn. And in this position, it feels a little bit dicey because Groudon having Precipice Blades against both of these Pokemon is really valuable. And the Zacian on the opposing end seemingly has a free Sacred Sword as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that seemingly is such a great key, right? Where, you know, I think Incineroar, for as strong as it is, that's one of the weaknesses, right? Where if you get in at the wrong time, and once you lose your fake out pressure, you kind of just like sit there and be a pinata, or you switch out and more valuable Pokemon takes damage, but this is such a great way to avoid that happening.
Yeah, so very critically here, the Sacred Sword kind of just whiffs into the Protect and a huge Behemoth Blade onto the opposing Zacian, right? So the idea is putting yourself into a position where Kyogre then subsequently can KO you with an Origin Pulse. If you don't get that free chip damage beforehand, then you're in a tougher position.
卓山的库拉多根本就是废物啊
Crit onto Zacian gets the KO. If Incineroar there doesn't have Protect, then it's a 2v1 situation where you've got Kyogre against both Groudon and Zacian, and suddenly that's looking a little bit scary, right? Because Kyogre first has to hit the Origin Pulse. You can just go for something like Sacred Sword. Sacred Sword in itself maybe can knock out Kyogre as well. And so, yeah, now Kyogre comes out. This time around, you know, you have a little bit healthier, and this is, I think, also a really critical turn in this battle because Kyogre here opts to Protect. And on the other end, Maddie actually ends up just whiffing into the Protect, and Incineroar is able to actually just knock out the Zacian.
Yeah, I mean, that's all those things, right? Where you, if you have the more traditional Incineroar set, Incineroar's not even here. You know, there's no Protect to whiff into. I mean, or if there is, you know, there's no opportunity cost to doing it. Just such a big swing, and yeah, I mean, it's not like it's a healthy Incineroar too, right? You know, it's not like it's just hanging on with a few hit points where that Protect saves half of its HP.
And I think here, very critically, what was important is that, you know, the Zacian's really low, right? So Flare Blitz will KO it. You might be thinking, okay, well, I could just safely Sacred Sword into Kyogre.
看一下现在有什么新的游戏
Incineroar actually, you know, is faster than the Groudon from earlier. So Sacred Sword goes into Protect. Now, if it targets the Incineroar there, that's, you know, very likely game over. Instead, Flare Blitz goes into Zacian, gets the KO there, and suddenly Kyogre is in a very good position against Groudon because, of course, we'll outspeed it, and then you don't have to worry about eating.
好像没什么游戏在特价。
And then here, Precipice Blades also, you know, going after the Incineroar, combined with the Shuka Berry, Incineroar critically survives here as well. So it felt like Maddie positioned himself into a pretty good spot, but two very critical Protects back-to-back with the Incineroar, then with the Kyogre. Getting both of those turns correctly was able to, yeah, really kind of bring the comeback here in this game.
Yeah, I mean, how clutch is that on Dylan's side, too? Where, like, I think sometimes people look at games and they look kind of the other way, like, oh, man, you know, that player had an advantage, and, like, then they lost the game anyway. But, like, yeah, I mean, he figured out, like, a pretty creative out to this situation, right, where he both is using a sort of, you know, non-standard moveset that he had, and then also, like, had to play, like, what, 4 turns in a row perfectly, and he hit it. And, you know, I think, you know, that's why he is a player who's up and coming. I think he does a good shot at making it to day 2 tomorrow, and I don't know, it's impressive to see. Where again, you know,
我还是搞不太懂为什么盖欧卡可以飞，为什么它可以飞在陆地上，然后库拉多却不能飞。
Yeah, I definitely do want to go back to that first game, actually, and just highlight the weakness policy, just because it's really cool. And I think, you know, this created for a very interesting end game. So, yeah, going back to the first game here, you know, Charizard here, a lot bulkier than you'd expect it to. So there's Max Lightning, and takes it so much better than you'd ever expect Charizard to take a Max Lightning, right? I believe Reflect had already been set up here as well. But the idea, part of the interesting debate normally is against the Thunderous Charizard lead. you know, you feel like you're playing a guessing game, right? It's like, oh, do I switch Charizard on a Groudon? But when you're using bulky Charizard with Reflect and Weakness Policy, suddenly you have to worry nearly as much, right? So it takes that way better than a player would ever expect. Sacred Sword here just cleanly gets the knockout onto Incineroar, and I think this may be one of the funnier moments where a Max Airstream somehow gets the knockout onto a Thundurus thanks to Weakness Policy.
Yeah, I just love this too, where it's, you know you're in trouble when stuff like this happens. Like, oh no, like, it's normally it's like, oh no, you mispredicted. You know, he accidentally hit Thundurus with the flying type move. Here you get the knockout, you get the speed boost. That's everything you could ever want. And you know, as much as like I think the debate will continue about whether or not Weakness Policy Charizard is good. It looked really good in that game.
Yeah, like being able to secure the KO and of course notably get a speed boost on the both Pokemon is really essential here, right? Because at this point, Maddie has won the weather war, right? You know, you've got Groudon in the back, and you're out, you know, faster than both of these Pokemon. But you know, the interesting thing about Charizard is post Dynamax, it's not exactly that powerful, and so you know, I think this next turn, Maddie just goes for a relatively safe play where he's like, okay, you've actually set up the rain. This is also one of the circumstances where using Hurricane on Charizard. A lot of times players are like, why would you use Hurricane? Higher base power for Max Extreme. And then second of all, when you're going up against these Kyogre Zacian teams, you can leverage that and get a higher, you know, base power attack with obviously very good accuracy here. And so I think here Maddie's saying, okay, well I already have a Groudon in the back, and if I just get chip damage on both of your Pokemon, single Precipice Blade should win the game. It's kind of difficult for you to knock out both of my Pokemon here, and so just opts for a Hurricane and Behemoth Blade. I think one thing like could be scary here is if you overcommit, double up into one slot, and then just suddenly lose, you know, both of your Pokemon maybe to like a Water Spout or Zacian gets like a critical hit onto your opposing Zacian, for example.
Yeah, it kind of becomes what Game 2 wound up being in reverse, right? Where like there's always that chance when you're spamming attack. I really like it. I really like Hurricane in general too. I just feel like, you know, I think more and more we're getting the turn we kind of expected, where this Zacian Kyogre matchup is so important. And you know, Hurricane maybe giving you a little edge once in a while in this matchup. I mean, it's probably in many cases better than it being more general, because this is the matchup you absolutely have to be able to win.
Absolutely, and Hurricane's also just one of those moves.
我还要再看2次赫普啊！
Really significant, right? It's like sometimes a single confusion.
还要再看2次脑残赫普。
Here, Kyogre does, you know, get a huge Origin Pulse off there.
算了，那我今天把它刷一刷好了。真的是有点刷到烦躁。刷一刷，明天休息，后天再继续。 不知道他刚刚看是2-2啦，所以应该是第2轮啦。他现在应该是第2轮而已。
Game 3 is pretty interesting because, of course, there was a pretty big Pokemon adjustment, and that Pokemon adjustment was that Gastrodon.
应该是只有打前面应该只有打4轮还是5轮吧，然后第2天吧。
Because of Ridya-san, you know, a Pokemon's gotten a ton of spotlight this year, but finally making an appearance.
Yeah, I think, you know, just kind of talking about team preview here also, like before we dive into the third game, both players kind of opted for the same options all 3 games. It was, you know, up until the end here where Gastrodon came out, right? But it was very much the same leads. It was Thundurus Zacian against Grimmsnarl Charizard. And so I'm curious if you think either player had an option to maybe mix things up, or was this just truly the best, you know, kind of line they could take?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think there's something to be said for kind of playing it straight. I think the way the first 2 games played out, I think if you're either player, maybe you feel like, oh, like, I should have had both of those games. So, like, I get it. I did kind of like the Gastrodon adjustment, even though it didn't really work. I mean, Gastrodon itself survived forever, I guess. It was kind of the flip side of what we used to make fun of Gastrodon for before this generation, where, like, it's really good at, like, staying alive on the field and surviving while all of its friends faint around it. Yep. And it's like, you wind up in the end game we wind up seeing here, right? Where it's like, okay, but, like, what's Gastrodon going to do now? But, like, it is a pretty good matchup with everything with the 2 grass-type Pokemon, who, like, largely weren't making appearances anyway, so why not, right?
Yeah, I definitely would have been curious to see a Gastrodon lead, I think, going into Game 3, right? Especially if you're expecting Incineroar plus Thundurus. The idea of Gastrodon is, first of all, well, you have a super effective Earth Power into Incineroar, Ice Beam into Thundurus, but more importantly, I would expect Gastrodon to take a Life Orb Max Airstream, and so, like, against Incineroar plus Thundurus turn 1, you can just go for a Protect, then turn 2, you pressure with Yawn onto Thundurus as well as something like Earth Power into Incineroar, and so the idea is, okay, well, right now, you know, maybe Gastrodon isn't getting maximum value because Kyogre isn't on the field, but at the same time, if you can scare away the Thundurus a little bit, even deterring 1 Dynamax turn from Thundurus goes a long way just because of how offensive a Pokemon it is, and Thundurus is so much stronger in Dynamax than outside.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. You know, it's like, I think, you know, from the perspective of just kind of like controlling the game, right? I mean, there's not a whole lot of defense on either side of these teams unless Grimmsnarl can get the screens going. So, like, you can get that pressure on there, kind of get that early advantage, and then also, you know, getting Gastrodon early helps prevent the endgame situation where Gastrodon came out late and just didn't take a lot of damage, but doesn't have time to get rolling before all of its teammates faint.
I think what was really interesting is in game 3 here, there was this position where Maddie made this max guard look really good, you know, bypassed the max lightning and the flare blitz. But I think one thing that Dylan did really well was use Incineroar and have it out on the field the entire time against Charizard, because the whole point of that is that you have so much more value and your opponent has much less value with G-Max Wildfire, right? You are essentially not taking G-Max Wildfire damage with one Pokemon constantly. And so I think like that's why he was leaning towards Incineroar Thundurus each game, because like, okay, if you're going to just lead Charizard, well, you know, the Incineroar isn't going to faint even with Max Rockfall. I'm okay. I think one interesting thing is Maddie played this game somewhat passively. So, you know, you lead Grimmsnarl Charizard, but something like switching into Groudon immediately and then just pressuring with the G-Max Wildfire Incineroar is interesting. But I can see why Maddie maybe didn't want to lean into that. Okay, even if you get a knockout, if it's a free switch into Kyogre, things can be scary. But in my head, I was like, okay, one approach Maddie can take is maybe go with Grim Charizard, Gastro Groudon, which is what he did. Turn 1, you try to get a knockout immediately. And Gastron immediately to cover for the Kyogre coming out.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just kind of like the day one of Worlds jitters, but I kind of feel like we're seeing a kind of a theme where a lot of the players like kind of come loose, just wind up not quite getting these sets. They're not quite bold enough, perhaps, with their lead choices, especially in these games. I get that for sure, but yeah, it's like I think there's some opportunity here the players aren't quite finding. And I'm curious if, like, as the day goes on and people kind of get their feet under them, if we'll start seeing a little bit more aggression and, like, especially the beginning of the later games in the sets.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, one of the main things in this format is you can lose the game so quickly. You get the wrong lead matchup with one. So I think for a lot of players, it's hard to feel super confident saying, okay, I'm going to take a big risk and just, you know, completely deviate from what I've done so far, especially if you feel like, Maddie actually played the early game super well. And then, of course, in game 3, one thing we didn't highlight was the Groudon getting burnt by Flare Blitz. It felt like even without the burn, maybe Dylan was actually still in an okay position. Gastron was a cool bring. I think the main problem for it is that maybe it was a little bit too late for it to come up, because at that point in the game, it wasn't doing enough damage. And like the play rough from Zacian just did so much into it by itself, right? So I think without the burn, definitely would be a closer game, but it wasn't like a burn that just single-handedly changed the game, I think, because I thought Dylan had played pretty well. But yeah, that was honestly a very fun, intense set against, you know, two of the more standard team compositions, but it feels like both players really made a lot of cool adjustments and had some really neat tricks up their sleeves. So that's it for this round, and I believe we're ready to get started with the next one. So let's throw it to the casters.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Hello, everyone. I'm Sierra Hunter, joined by Joe Brown. We're absolutely thrilled to be here at the Pokemon World Championships. This has been absolutely amazing so far. It surpassed every expectation. And finally, getting to sit here on the big stage and cast our first match together.
Yes, this has been a long time waiting, not just us behind the desk, but for everybody within the Pokemon community waiting for 3 years for the World Championships to return. And I'm so happy that we could be here in London and experiencing this just like everyone else is as well. We're like out on the floor, Sierra. You see, it's like this might be the biggest world setup I've ever seen, honestly.
It is. Seeing the stage even this morning, being able to go there for the opening ceremonies, every single part of it has just been, wow, this event is getting bigger and bigger and better every single year, and honestly, well worth the wait. I hate waiting, but considering how things have been so far, and we're only on day one, it was worth it.
No, absolutely. This is a really cool venue, and we really appreciate the opportunity to be here, you know, showcasing some of the best VGC players in the world. So I'm very excited to see what happens while we're behind the desk this weekend.
Especially, too, because we're going to be able to showcase the players that have got those invites or are well on track on the invite before we took that break, but also the new age players and how everything is meeting up going against each other. I feel like that's the most interesting part of all, as well as the fact that whoever is going to be taking down this World Championships is just undisputably the Pokemon Sword and Shield World Champion. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's kind of inarguable at that point, right? Yeah. This is the Sword and Shield Championship, so other eras you're like, oh, I was better in 2017 or 2018 with different mechanics and different rule sets for the format. But with Series 12 being the entire 2022 season of VGC, these trainers have had all of the year to every regional they went to, every, you know, international championship that they participated in. Like, they've got their fill of Series 12, and now here is the climax of the format here with Worlds.
Yeah, so what has been your favorite part then of everything going on today?
I don't know.
Difficult question, I know.
It's tough because the opening ceremony is really cool. The stage behind us, if everyone watching at home, like, yes, it is as gigantic as it looks on the screen. There's so many things with the phones. Like Ichiharu was coming out, the phone on the stage, and the London Eye and the London Bridge also in the background. Like seeing all of that stuff. Opening ceremony was definitely like, I remember sitting in line waiting to get in. We go to Worlds every year. You totally forget about how that experience is. The stress, like, am I going to make it by 9? And we make it by 9, and we get to see it every time.
That's why you have to make friends that are going to save you a seat, so you don't have to have that stress. You can still have the anticipation and the excitement, but you don't have the stress. But regardless, it was well worth it. Even just that hype trailer right at the end before we got everything kicked off, the little Pachirisu there.
Oh, I was emotional.
Yeah, that was like a goosebumps moment. That was, oh my gosh, we are really here. This is actually happening. This is about to be the 2022 Pokemon World Championships for new Pokemon and new trainers to be stamped into history, just like that Pachirisu was.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe this weekend we'll have another Pachirisu moment that, you know, changed pretty much for anyone who doesn't know. Back in 2014, Seijun Park won the World Championships with Pachirisu, and, you know, myself included, many people started playing VGC because of how significant of a moment that was. So it would be really awesome if here in London we would have another significant moment like that for VGC's history.
Though I feel like that is the one moment that, if anyone knows anything about, that is the moment. That is the moment they know is this Pachirisu. And it's just about now whether your opportunity at the Pokemon World Championships, if you can kind of go and make that moment for yourself, where years and years down the line, there's going to be that hype video. There's going to be that legacy that you've built and you've created.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, who knows if it'll be a player currently playing on day 1 right now that's going to steamroll through day 2 and Top Cut and everything, or is it someone who's already in day 2 right now? They're kind of waiting in the wings, waiting for the fog to clear. As we are in London, there's a lot of it around. Yes. So waiting for the fog to clear, and then they're actually going to claim their stake to the VGC Championship here in 2022.
You were talking about the stress of waiting in the line to get to the open ceremonies. What about the stress that these day 1 players have? This is brutal out here. These day 2 players, sure, you're still having that expectation and those nerves heading into day 2 because you're expected to perform. You're so close to the championship title, but now you're competing in the best of the best. Going against this day 1, there's still so many great players out there, but you don't know what people have been working on. Sure, this format's been around for a little bit, but there's always going to be that new tech. There's always going to be people who have been practicing things in private, and you don't know who you're going to be sitting down against, and just one match gone completely sideways, that could be your chance to win for a Pokemon World Champion, and that is, I think, the most terrifying thing of all for this weekend.
No, absolutely. Playing day 1 at Worlds is playing VGC on hard mode, because you have to play, you know, 8 more rounds than the players who are on day 2 have to play, right, at that point. So, like, they're getting to rest their brains. Maybe they go visit Buckingham Palace while you're out here, you know, sweating these, you know, Precipice Blades hits or not. They're out there seeing Big Ben and enjoying everything that London has to offer, and you're here trying to just make it to where they already are.
To be fair, I'm sure a lot of those players are actually watching and waiting to see what is in the shadows for that day 2 and what is to be expected. But something now going to be brought to light is going to be our round 4 matches. We are ready to head over to the stage and find out who is going to be our next round opponent. And it is going to be Ben Grismer going up against Shohei Kimura.
Yeah, Shohei and Ben, 2 world, you know, formerly Worlds qualified players, and especially Ben Grismer this year in North America. You would say he was one of the best players in North America, but he actually flew over the pond to this side of the pond where we are earlier this year and got top 4 at the Liverpool Regional Championships with his trusty Shedinja that Ben is really known for. Also a multiple-time top 32 finisher of the North American International Championships, as well as some other regional top cuts to Ben's name. But his opponent is no slouch, as Shohei Kimura in 2017 finished 2nd at the Japan National Championships. And for anyone who knows VGC, they know just how hardcore the Japan National Championships are and how difficult they are to perform well at there. Also making it to Worlds that year, and Shohei has 2 top 16 finishes at International Championships.
Yeah, and I love the fact that these players have been playing for a hot second, so they've gotten that experience before. They're not these new age players. They're experienced. They know what it's like to be competing on a grand scale, but this will be the big accomplishment that we're waiting for at this point. I mean, finalists at Japanese Nationals, that is still amazing, but it is nothing like getting, you know, finalists or even the world champion title.
Absolutely, and what I'm really interested in this matchup is Ben Gersman in North America and Shohei in Japan. Ben is really known for some of his crazier strategies like Shedinja, as he has performed very well with throughout many tournaments, through many different Pokemon games. And there it is right there, a very spicy team that Ben has brought here to London on day one. But Shohei with a more consistent team, but as a Japanese player, those Japan national tournaments are best of one. So there's often more room for more, let's say, varied strategies. So maybe Shohei has more experience against teams that like Ben has here today than some of the North American player base does.
And even when you have these traditional teams, you never know when there's going to be that unexpected tech to make sure that you can be making their way through. You definitely can't be caught slacking against them whatsoever. But I'm naturally drawn towards Ben team at this point. I mean, you were talking about the London Fog, and this team is definitely
日本的那一个，它是2个语言都一样的吗？
Every single part of this is
所以我刷完这个再刷一个就可以。
thing is that Zacian, and I mean, I don't think we're really getting rid of that anytime soon.
Yeah, I think it's a requirement to bring Zacian. I don't know if that was in the.
我只要在1个小时，我就解除痛苦了。
Every team we've seen so far has had that Pokemon.
There is for a reason. It is good, but it is time to get started. First match heading into round 4. The Zacian on the field to start next to this Kyogre double restricted lead up against the Sableye and the Kyurem.
Kyurem White is a Pokemon that can be an absolute nightmare if you are not prepared for it. A Pokemon like the Kyogre there definitely is safer than the Groudon, as we've seen in many different times. Groudon cannot face well against the Kyurem White there. So a very consistent lead out of Shohei with Kyogre and Zacian. What you have to worry about is the Sableye on Ben's end there. It's a prankster Pokemon. It's kind of a throwback to the olden days of VGC compared to these newer, Pokemon like Grimmsnarl and Whimsicott, other pranksters. The Sableye is very tricky, can use Quash to delay your opponent's attack to later on in the turn, which helps out Kyurem White being able to attack beforehand. And typically Kyurem White is seen as probably the predominant choice to Dynamax on Ben's team typically there, besides maybe the Urshifu. So I wonder if that is what Ben's going to go for.
I mean, the Dynamax to start, it's never going to be the Sableye, so here it is. Ben looking to apply this pressure right away, where Shohei opting instead to be swapping that Zacian out and bring in the Thundurus to try and help combat this in some sort of way.
Yeah, but Thundurus is not going to want to take a Max Hailstorm. That's kind of the worry you think of if you let this Kyurem start rolling, you're going to have problems.
We're talking about the tricks that Sableye likes to have up its sleeve, and Ally Switch is one of those as well, making sure that Shohei might not be able to attack exactly where he may want to, as Kyurem firing off this Max Quake. Nice for a little bit of damage, and definitely nice for this special defense boost, which fares very well typically against this Ogre, especially with this Water Spout. Already taking damage, it's not going to do much, and with the special defense boost, going to do even less.
Yeah, that's definitely a smart play out of Ben, because you don't want to make any crazy turn 1 reads of game 1 in the round. You don't want to make a Max Hailstorm switch in, because with Zacian and Kyogre on the field at that point, it wasn't really safe to click Max Hailstorm. So now that you know the Zacian is out, you have to worry about the Thundurus. We've seen so many times so far today, Sierra, how strong Dynamax Thundurus can be with Max Airstream or just whatever to help out the team. But when you're facing a Kyurem, you might never be able to even get the attack thanks to Sableye.
Yeah, that Quash can definitely be pesky, and that Max Hailstorm you were talking about that it's not going to appreciate, well, that is the case. There's no chance here. That is going to be a quick one-hit KO, as well as a chance to reset this weather into the hill.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's going to take out, even though the Kyogre has less damage, now he has to go for the inaccurate attack.
That's going to do even less damage when that is a double miss. That was a turn full of disaster for Shohei.
So that turn 1 Max Quake is proving even more dividends later on, because you put Kyogre's health lower so that its Water Spout was not going to be effective. You have to risk the Origin Pulse, and Ben gets rewarded handsomely for that turn because he dodges all of the damage there, and Ben's just ready for his last turn of Dynamax at this point to try to just have another strong attack, maybe the Max Quake into the Zacian that switched in, or you want to go for another attack onto the already half-health Kyogre there. But this is very troubling for Shohei if he can't get his Kyogre to connect on his moves.
And it's disastrous as well with the Zacian out on the field because it definitely doesn't appreciate the that this Kirim has.
右边的队伍
that the first turnaround with the
这是
swap
恶
in,
心
but
人
considering the
的
Max Quakes did target
可
into
是
the Kyogre
官方也没
instead,
说不行啊
it was kind of a swap that didn't really
官
work
方也
out,
没有
and
说
now
不
it
行
still has to
又
be
不
on
行
the
用这样的
face
队伍
wrath of this last turn of
可是
Dynamax.
真的很恶
Kirim is
心的
definitely putting in that work.
Absolutely. Life Orb, Dynamax, Kirim White is, as we said at the beginning of the set,
幸好他没有直接在主播台啊，直接那个什么交换场地，从头恶心到尾。
Despite the special defense boost on Ben's side, and despite the lowered health from the Kyogre, it is still going to be the Dynamax coming out. That's a way to definitely not miss these moves when you do have that Dynamax and a way to be applying that pressure. That way, protect onto the Zacian, no Quash, no Max Quake hitting into you, and that Quash hitting into that slot, make sure the Sableye not going to be doing much for this turn. Now, the Max Quake fired off. You can only imagine where this is going, and thanks to that Protect, not doing nearly as much devastating damage as it would have otherwise. Now, we're going to see another special defense boost, and that should fare pretty well into whatever this Kyogre wants to do. That Max Geyser not going to be doing extra damage because it is the hill now, but at least a chance to reset the weather.
The second boost!
It holds on because of that boost.
Yeah, that's crazy. And now that the hail is gone, you're actually not even able to knock it out, which it would have that turn. So I was questioning at the beginning of this turn when he Dynamaxed, hail was currently up. And Groudon players, they'll switch their restricted out to reset their weather, like the rain here in Kyogre's case. But Shohei deciding to not take that extra turn, not reveal his fourth Pokemon in the match, and just let Kyogre use his Dynamax while the hail is up, instead actually cost him twofold there. He didn't do enough damage because rain wasn't up, and then he didn't knock it out because he got rid of hail at the same time.
A tricky situation, that's for sure. And at this point, not wanting the Zacian to face the, ground attack Quash combination that Ben has available, just has to be swapping out into that Incineroar. Because of that, won't get Quashed, not that that would have mattered too much, but Incineroar is not going to appreciate the Earth Power any less. Super effective hit, another one-hit KO coming out, and Shohei down to his final two Pokemon at this point. This Kyogre is going to have to do a lot of work in this matchup. And, I mean, when a Max Geyser is used just to be finishing off the Sableye, that's a tough spot.
That is very difficult because you don't want... You have to knock it out right there. The Sableye's Quash is just being too problematic here, but wasting your second turn of Dynamax just to take care of a measly 10 hit points on a Sableye compared to the gigantic threat on the field, which has been the Kirim White the entire game, is not the position that Shohei wants to be in. So now that he's down to his final two Pokemon, Ben has now just going to reveal his third Pokemon, right? It's been the Sableye and Kirim White lead the entire match so far in game one. So if you bring in the Zacian here, you can try to find out the information on if you're faster or not. But instead, if you bring Shedinja, you think, hey, maybe Shohei doesn't have any attacks to get rid of my Shedinja.
I mean, you were talking too about Ben and just how utilized the Shedinja was for him, and now feeling confident bringing it out in this matchup. I mean, regardless of what's coming on in Ben's end, just the Pokemon advantage that Ben has at this point is still just astonishing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then he's kind of bringing his ringer in the back in Shedinja, who is essentially Ben's partner Pokemon throughout his history in VGC. He's used it so many different times, and if you are not prepared for it, Shedinja is a Pokemon that it has 1 HP, right? But thanks to its ability, it can only take damage from super effective attacks. So if you do not have any moves that can hit it super effectively, you're not able to hit it at all, and that can be a really difficult, hurdle to overcome from players that don't prepare to face Shedinja.
You got to make sure there's always something in your back pocket just in case that bug is to come out. Behemoth Blade to start off the turn coming out from Shohei is going to finish off this Kirim as the Max Geyser into the Wonder Guard is not going to do anything whatsoever. Now a big reveal. It's going to be the Assault Vest on this Pokemon. Going to take a bit of damage from this Poltergeist.
Yeah, the Poltergeist, it's a stronger attack if your opponent is holding a held item, excuse me. So it actually does more damage and reveals information. So it's pretty helpful for Ben there to now know for the rest of the set that it is a Assault Vest on the Kirim. But now that Zacian has come in for Ben, you can try to stay safe. You don't want to get hit by the opposing Behemoth Blade, right? You got to try to figure out at this point how these two Zacians are trained, which one's typically faster, or if they're both as fast as they can be, and you have to risk the speed ties every turn. But Kyogre's kind of not very helpful for the rest of this match. You can't ignore it because you can always crit Origin Pulse or something like that while the rain is up, and that can be bad for Ben. So you can't fully ignore it, but definitely right now, Shohei's Zacian's a bigger target, and that's why he protects it.
Yeah, protect to make sure you're not going to be hit in response, and sure enough, that's exactly where the Behemoth Blade from Ben's end was going to be coming out. Origin Pulse, of course, we already know how that story goes into the Wonder Guard, but we'll at least be able to connect this time around on it to the Zacian, picking up a good, healthy amount of damage. Poltergeist in return back into this Kyogre, just to consistently be chipping away this damage and actually do enough this time around to be picking up the KO and put Shohei to his last and final Pokemon.
不会是悠长啊，真的是恶心呐！虽然我之前有在用，太恶心了，要怎么打
？It seems like 1 HP is
just
enough. You can have 1,000 HP or 1 HP. At this point, you don't have an attack to hit the Shedinja there, and as long as Poltergeist connects, you would eventually be able to knock it out.
Yeah, just doing that damage slowly or quickly. Zacian hits like a truck and is going to be enough to do the trick. Ben going to be taking this first match here in round 4.
And this is just a quintessential Ben Grismer team, really, with the Kirim Light and
他的表情好自在哦。
really showing very well in that matchup. Shohei has to be a little more careful with his Dynamax usage, right? You saw the Kyogre turn 1 of Dynamax, did not get the knockout, and then lets the Sableye stay on the field. Then turn 2 just had to hit 10 HP on the Sableye, so another wasted turn. And then turn 3, the Max Geyser went into Wonder Guard ability from the Shedinja there. So if I'm Shohei, I'm looking for ways in game 2 for an adjustment to have a better Dynamax usage. If it's either the Thundurus or Rillaboom, or even if it is Kyogre, make sure that can actually do more damage than it was doing there. And one of the key things that we noted, Sierra, was those 2 Max Quake boosts from Kirim White were so pivotal in that matchup for Ben.
Yeah, and even the fact that the Max Quake boost was pivotal, you saw it in that very first turn that Shohei did attempt to swap out into that Thundurus, make sure that there wasn't going to be anything that connected, be able to go for the Water Spout in return, but it was a target into that Kyogre instead. So all of a sudden, Shohei would almost just seem like a turn behind at that point. You had the swap, you didn't bait the Max Quake into anything, and all of a sudden your Kyogre's doing so much less damage. And I think into the second game as well, it's obviously you don't want the Max Quake boost to be going up, but you also need a way to figure out how to be dealing with this Kyurem and Sableye sooner, because using a Max turn to take care of the Sableye you couldn't get rid of earlier was just disastrous. And we got to see how Ben ran through Shohei's team until the Shedinja was just sitting there looking pretty.
Right, that's why supportive Pokemon are so important in VGC. Things throughout the history of Pokemon like Amoonguss and Incineroar or Sableye or other Whimsicott, other prankster Pokemon, they're so key because every turn that you're targeting the supportive Pokemon because it's a nuisance to your strategy is a turn you're not targeting the important, attacker on the team like the Kirim White. So that's really a struggle that Shohei is going to have to figure out in this matchup, is if you waste so much time because it's such a problem to deal with the Sableye, then that just lets the Kirim White with its Life Orb and its Dynamax and just, incredibly strong stats to do massive amounts of damage there. It really just lets it steamroll your team.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because there also has been cases where the supportive Pokemon have been in a spot where they can't really do anything. They're not there to be dealing damage. And if the Pokemon beside them aren't being able to be enabled at all, and they can't be dealing the damage, then the supportive Pokemon's like, oh, okay, well, I can't do anything either. So even if you're not really Pokemon, but getting rid of what it's trying to set up, maybe that could be a way to also eliminate it. Because once the Sableye can't really help its partner Pokemon, what does it do?
No, definitely not. There's definitely there's many Pokemon throughout VGC's history that you kind of look at and you're saying, oh, I really love how it fits my team, really how it puts everything into the right slots. and then all it does is just watch all its friends get knocked out
Yeah.
the whole time. You know what I mean? And you're like the classic example would be something like Crobat back in the day with Tailwind.
问就是出，
Crobat was able to do.
结果他没有出。
The Crobat dilemma was like, all right, had some really nice support with Tailwind.
不过我觉得会出的可能性很大，因为他那个左边那个玩家几乎没有什么手段可以对抗鬼场，就等于他最后一个保命的。他只要把一些天气的招式都弄掉，基本上他就不用怕他了。
meant for damage. Absolutely nothing if the Pokemon next to it isn't. So there's the two different ways that Shohei could really go about this in this next match. And it'll be really interesting to see which one he opts for, because just the synergy that Ben's team has in general, it is a tricky situation because this pure power and then just the denial with the Shedinja is just a little too much.
The other thing I was like thinking about on Shohei is the Shedinja item reveal. It's pretty much usually Focus Sash and Safety Goggles. And if you let the hail stay up, you would have had it revealed if it took damage or not. It didn't, you know, if it took damage, then it wasn't the Safety Goggles. If it did, it would have been able. So you didn't even get that information game out of your loss anyway, too. Like sometimes you can get a little saving grace, like, all right.
看来左边在烦恼要出什么，你看右边多轻松自在啊！一只鬼蝉打天下，然后又在一个什么勾魂眼压你，哇！还有一只百变怪，超爽，完美的队伍。
Yeah, and that is not great going into this game too, because now winning these two back-to-back games, you're trying to readjust your game plan while still not having that full information that your opponent now has. At this point, Ben was able to take all the KOs, be able to get that information with this Poltergeist, and is like, okay, well, I already won, I'm already in such a great spot, and I know what I can realistically expect. So if my opponent's making this change, well, I can just try and get ahead going.
左边烦恼到底要怎么打啊？
whatsoever. So definitely in a pin situation, and I'm so intrigued to see how he's going to get out of it, because this team, a bit more of a standard team, they are standard.
因为他只剩下那个 天气的那个巨兵跟那个龙卷云的那个飞冲比较有用而已，其他的几乎没办法打鬼蝉。 他又要延后了，我还猜他应该是延后参降了，然后只用大力打盖欧卡那一边。
Now Ben knows, okay, well, if I hit into the Kyogre, I can still have the same impact as that game one. But now Shohei knows that this is a line I can do. This option could just fire Behemoth Blade off.
And Shohei definitely expects that his best answer to the Kyurem White is Zacian with Behemoth Blade doing the double damage to a Dynamax Pokemon. Obviously would be very strong into Kyurem there. But the question is if Sableye will let the Zacian attack it, because if you leave yourself open here without a protect, you're probably going to have to eat a Life Orb Max Quake for your troubles there. And the Sableye's going to quash to make sure, or it can quash, I should say, to let the Kyurem White be able to attack before the Zacian can.
Maybe a situation of give a little, take a little, even if the Zacian is going to be on the receiving end of the Max Quake, maybe do something else. But if it is going to be on the receiving end, it will be through a protect. Fake out targeting right into that slot, which means a follow-up Max Quake might have just been headed that way. No, instead it will be into the Kyogre. It will be a kind of similar line in that sense going on into this game to make sure that this special defense boost can be gained, and the Water Spout in retaliation not going to be able to do as much damage.
Yeah, just somewhat of a repeat of Game 1's turn there, where the Max Quake brought it down and the Water Spout didn't do as much damage because of it. But that protect, a very safe middle ground play that Ben made there, using Fake Out on Zacian to stop it from a Behemoth Blade if it didn't protect, but also getting the Max Quake onto Kyogre to hinder the damage output.
盖欧卡那边比较麻烦诶，他喷也喷不死。
Water Spout there, and giving yourself the +1 special defense, which was so critical in Game 1, because the at +2 special defense is Zacian, or excuse me, the Sableye was able to hang on from Kyogre's attack there. So now if you are Shohei, you're really in the same situation as we were talking about on turn 1. You have to worry about Quash being able to delay your attack.
他只要想办法先处理掉一个艾欧卡就可以。
You know, it's going to be hard to knock it out, and you're not even going to be able to if you just switch out Zacian.
红妖精哦。但他最后一只是谁？最后一只就龙卷云喽。不啊，雷电云呢？
A little bit of shenanigans happening with it. Lego maybe not wanting to go for another move, maybe missing something. Maybe we'll never know. Now a Max Quake fired off from Ben. Get another one of these boosts. Do a bit more damage. And this water spout's doing Pebbles Burst.
Yeah, and maybe Shohei a bit wary from game 1 where he double missed Origin Pulse when he was at half health. He's like, I'm half health. This water spout's not going to be effective. So now choosing to click that on this turn, you're also kind of thinking he's going to Max Quake my Zacian slot, so I might be safe. But you get punished for that decision because now you didn't take the risk of doing more damage with Origin Pulse. So you almost essentially didn't do any damage because of how low HP that the Kyogre is currently at.
It's doing not much. This time, no, not use Fake Out. Instead, it will be the ally switch to switch things around a little bit. Whimsicott joining the field is going to take this opportunity to set up the Tailwind to make sure that Shohei has the speed on his side going forward into this match. A welcome change going into things, but the damage that the Kyogre wasn't able to do previously is really hurting right about now as no KOs picked up. Now a Max Hailstorm fired off into the Whimsicott to deal with it. Does bring it down to Sash, but also going to be setting the hail.
他是因为要让红妖精直接下去吗
the 1 HP remaining there. I just think it's really interesting as the Whimsicott gets knocked out that a Sableye was able to take
那他后手就不是鬼缠喽。
every day, but because of the Max Quake boost, and then actually hangs on, doesn't get knocked out from the hail. Because of those boosts and because of how low of an HP the Kyogre is at, really been a problem for Shohei in this matchup. And that was a pretty nice turn from Ben because now you're back in that same spot. You lost Dynamax, so I don't think, even with the Life Orb, I'm not sure how the interaction is going to work with how much Earth Power does into the Zacian, but you're still worried about Quash.
Well, and the situation, too, is now Shohei does have the speed advantage on his side and hasn't used Max whatsoever. So the Whimsicott, even joining the field for only that one turn, has really left that impact because both of these Pokemon now can go and outspeed, and Sableye can
现在就是他要来赌到底对方是端什么。入围的话，参强就要守住。
The back is his 4th Pokemon. If it's the Thundurus, that's a great Dynamax attacker, as we've seen so many times so far throughout the day. And the
我是觉得入围的机会还蛮高的。
has already used up its Dynamax turns there, so you would have that.
而且不管怎样，对方后手还有一只百变怪。
The matchup, but if it's something like Incineroar, it might be more difficult to break through Ben's team.
The protect from the Zacian is going to make sure the Quash does nothing. Water Spout, you know it's not really going to be doing much damage. You don't need it to. You needed to get rid of this Sableye at this point, and, you know, for the light drizzle that this Kyogre has, it is going to be enough to finally take that Pokemon out. With the Quash comes the Earth Power, and Shohei not taking any impact from Ben in that turn.
Yeah, and now the Zacian is not scared about the Quash, so Ben is going to have to bring in another.
现在对方后手是什么呢？百变怪吗？百变怪的话就超爽的。
And you gain, you know, how often can you get 2?
可是我觉得应该是鬼缠啊。
You might want to take advantage of that while you can. But at this point, if it is something slower than the Zacian, you are now okay with, you're not worried about getting knocked out before you can Behemoth Blade into the Kyogre.
他速我应该在百变怪啊，所以那他的。
Game 2's Dynamax didn't work as amazingly.
变白龙就不是，变白龙应该是生命宝珠，也不是，应该是那个啦，那个背心的。苍响。那他是打算直接把那个收掉喽，把对方的苍响直接处理掉。
Make sure that you're not stuck in a situation where the game is lost because you'd have nothing to be hitting.
他顺便也在拖那个天气的回合。
Now to try and deal with these problem Pokemon on Ben's side. Sableye is gone. Kyurem Still has a decent chunk of health, but I'm sure you could get rid of that pretty fast. And now, since you can't outspeed the Zacian that Ben has, it gives you a nice window of opportunity to just start dealing that damage on your own.
But let's see what happens between these two Zacians on the field right now, right? You never know who is going to be able to attack first. So if you waited the whole game to just avoid Quash so you could attack, and then Ben Zacian knocks you out before you can attack again anyway, that'd be really a heartbreaking turn.
So it's actually going to be the Incineroar from Shohei joining the field. Going to be bringing this Intimidate onto Ben's own Zacian.
Oh, 对方的超强比较
the fourth and final Pokemon at that point. His character goes into the back. The Behemoth Fade fired off into the Kyurem.
我明天配同样的去打级别，为什么
？Very fortunate for Shohei there that he was able to.
你说这一个队伍吗？
In prison from the Zacian, gonna make sure that any moves
他刚弄什么？
are not going to be allowed to be used going forward. And you know what moves those are?
他刚弄剑舞，
is going to be things
我刚没看到。
like this Behemoth Blade. That's going to be things like this Sacred Sword. And a fourth and final Pokemon
竟然是二熊
Shifu.
He didn't
封印
even bring the Shedinja in game 2. He made the adjustment with
死定参想。
I'm just over here like
参想直接死去了，封印。
That would have been the like coolest pop off of round 4 of Worlds I've ever seen there, but it just does not work out for him there. And you don't know if it is a speed tie or if Shohei is naturally faster than Ben's there.
那他只要专心打左边就好了。
Right now, it is a fighting type that's really strong into Incineroar. You can hit it with close combat, But as we were talking about, Incineroar really is the best option for Dynamax left on Shohei's side. So if you get double HP,
竟然是封印，现在还有人在用封印，真是超恶心的队伍。哎，我明天想要来玩一下。
You know, it doesn't. It's kind of tough, but it's going to be up to Incineroar here.
The Max Incineroar coming out at the Pokemon World
他改变，他要去火了吗？
The Kyogre is so low. The Zacian obviously cannot go for the Dynamax, so it's the only possible
可是他速度比那个慢啊。
to see. Quick Attack is going to be hitting just a little bit of damage. Not that thing it can do, but look at this. This Sacred Sword into the Incineroar, the super effective damage, gonna be doing absolutely nothing with the Chople Berry. Now, the Max Flare into Zacian, that is gonna deal the damage that is necessary to be taking the Zacian out and bringing it just down to the Urshifu.
Everybody and their mother has run Shuka Berry Incineroar all season, and Shohei shows up to Worlds with Chople Berry.
And now this hit from the Urshifu. Ben's fallen, and the Incineroar hangs on the final turn of Tailwind. So that will bring about the
我忘记了，我记得好像还是在吧。
Now the speed is even for both
我印象中是在啊。
And Ben doesn't even get to use that to advantage now.
我有点忘记，很久没看到。
That maybe is a speed tie question. We'll have to resolve in game 3 as that's
幸好他上的是老虎，不然直接死去了吧。
I love seeing different regions of the world interacting like this.
左边的很紧张的。
Japan, the different strategies, Dynamax, Incineroar, the whole time.
你看，就算拿到个什么优产，也不一定会赢啊。啊，有些 VGC 玩家就会说，哦，你拿那个交换场地很怎样怎样。
I'd rather the Incineroar because it's such a bulky Pokemon. Max Flare is really strong. Gaining that double HP to its stat when you do Dynamax it proved.
从来都是只有训练家的问题，宝可梦根本就没问题。
Take both of those hits and hang on and get the knockout there. So now Ben's usually the guy that's like, hey, I'm the one with the tricks up my sleeves. What's going on here? Shohei is trying to match my game.
我觉得这场打完我也差不多放完。
Shohei wasn't able to get in that first match. He got in the end into this second match. Now you know about this in prison. Now you know that Ben isn't worried about bringing this Urshifu, and actually will bring it into the match. This Shedinja's not going to be the end-all be-all here. And we go into this last and final match with both players having a really good idea of realistically what the other can bring. And I'm so excited to see the beginning of that match was very much so the same strategies, but that second half, crazy.
And the other thing, if you're on Ben's side, right, this is kind of the old Smeargle dilemma from VGC's seasons past with Shedinja. you won game 1 and you brought it. You lost game 2 and you didn't bring it, right? What is on Ben's mind in this game 3? It doesn't seem like super critical in this matchup. It is when it gets down to Zashi and Kyogre. If that is the 2 remaining Pokemon that Shohei has on the team, then it's just it's an auto win essentially at that point. But you're worried about Incineroar, you're worried about Thundurus as well. They can both hit it super effectively there. So I wonder how Ben is feeling on, you know, Shedinja's probability of coming in game 3.
And as we're wondering about what Ben is thinking with the Shedinja, well, now Shohei also has to be thinking, okay, what is Ben thinking about the Shedinja? Because the last thing you want to do while making your adjustments for this 3rd game is disrespect the fact that the Shedinja can be hitting the field at any point. Sure, it was covered in that last match. If it was Shedinja going there at the end, I mean, that's easy picking for Incineroar. It has no problem.
他只要小心他的火喵，基本上其他的他都不是对手。
You have these mind games. All right, well, Ben
火
knows
喵要先处理掉。
that I can't be using and we're not afraid to use. Is he going to cover for that? All of a sudden, do I need to then cover for what he's bringing? You've got to make sure that Shedinja doesn't get left in the shadows and all of a sudden coming out for a nasty surprise.
And you also have to get more usage out of Kyogre if you're Shohei. Has really not been a great showing in these first 2 games for his premier restricted Pokemon in Kyogre. So if you are going to make the same lead, you have to have a different strategy, or maybe you can switch it up and have Kyogre safer in the back and you're not taking that Max Quake on the first turn.
This is a big adjustment. The Ditto to start off, and it's going to be in the slot right across from the Zacian. You're taking that 50-50, and that means that will be a double restricted lead for Ben with that Ditto Imposter turning into a nice, strong Zacian.
Yeah, the Ditto there, you had a 1 in 6 Pokemon chance of calling the correct Pokemon to be in that slot, and Ben gets the Zacian there. This is one of the things that is so scary with Ditto teams, these super aggressive teams, is you're punishing your opponent for their own Pokemon. Now Ditto has access to Behemoth Blade.
我觉得他不会拒。
That would make it faster than the Zacian in a 1-to-1
matchup. 现在拒对他，可是 我看一下，对方有绿兽斩、嬉闹跟守住，还有一招是那个变观音闪。
But with Zacian, because it's not Ditto anymore, Zacian and Kira White on the field right now, that's a pretty strong offensive pairing for Ben.
And it's a tricky situation, right? Because normally you would see this Zacian next to a Whimsicott, you're like, oh wow, a Tailwind and Behemoth Blade, this is dangerous, this is fast, this is dangerous. It could be a good sort of spot. The Ditto not wanting to stick around into the Zacian though, instead bringing out the Sableye is this Whimsicott now also swapping out. It is going to be a turn of everyone readjusting. And it was an Incineroar response into that impostered Ditto.
Yeah, now you have to. The only people that can move this turn are the Kyurem and the Zacian there. So if there's a Dynamax, you see from Ben, all the Dynamax the Kyurem on the first turn. Since there is no quash, there's no protect this turn.
除非他抓到他会换，他抓到他会换，他就会打右边。
So that is something that can be more beneficial for Shohei.
Yeah, but also Ben being able to apply
如果他巨火打那个苍响，真的是会很痛。
It can be the Behemoth now from Zacian. It's all about where it's going to be targeting, just how it'll fare, and it actually will be into this slot. Double damage, and double damage is going to be enough to be picking up this one-hit KO. This first turn max is going to be the last and final turn of match.
还没有打中要害，有这么痛哦！
And think about it.
冰后火抵消。
You don't really want to Dynamax them, like so. If you try to save Dynamax for later, you're not getting value. But now you have none of it. Even if you try to save it, you might get 1 or 2 turns. Now you get nothing.
请继续邪恶中立吧，邪恶混乱，快点，不要中立混乱，我要输了。他那个被打掉，整个是被翻盘的，没办法。他后手，哇！ 我这么看好你，小胖子，你竟然输了！多好的混乱邪恶呢！ 可恶！ 我要来抄这一组，我要来打这个。
Absolutely. So I mean, Shohei with a great display of how to make adjustments throughout a set there. You go into it thinking Kyler is going to be your best strategy, and then you realize that the Kyler is not as effective as you would really like it to be in this particular matchup there. So having things like the Dynamax Incineroar and the Choppleberry being able to help you out in these matchups. Like, I'm not sure if the Choppleberry is for Urshifu. Shohei was expecting a big Urshifu uptick because there's been so many ghost types that have been doing well, like Lunala and Calyrex Shadow Rider. Maybe he was expecting a meta call that there'd be more Urshifu here at World, so that's what Choppleberry was instead of the Shukaberry that is much more common on the Incineroar. But like those adjustments in Game 2 and then in Game 3, just like calling that he was going to Dynamax and he wouldn't, and the Ditto was not going to be able to, knock him out or something. That was a very brave play out of Shohei, and it worked out.
I mean, just going for that first turn Dynamax, when you're in that situation, it looks dangerous on Ben's end because you have that pseudo Zacian to be dealing this damage. You have this Kyurem that can deal the damage, but when you take a second to look at the situation further, a big reason why that Kyurem was enabled was because of that Sableye. So the Ditto was really, really cool, but then you swapped it out instantly into the Sableye. You're not getting any mileage out of it.
可恶，他刚刚就差一点就可以打赢对方了，真的是哦。他不要换下去就没事了，先守住一回合嘛，对不对？预守一回合啊。
Could have been the turn, but the defensive lead's not going to be able to do much.
这么爱冲
So strong and powerful.
It was pretty cool that the whole set really did come down to Sableye, and that's for many older Pokemon fans who have loved seeing Sableye throughout the years in VGC. It's cool that it was so pivotal in this set because every turn of every game it was, if he quashes, he's gonna knock me out before I get the Behemoth Blade out. If he doesn't quash, then I knock out the Kyurem before he can max quake me. Like, there's those plays that you have to make every single turn. It's a coin toss. It's a 50-50 in your head. What is he gonna do every turn? And that's why it's so stressful to play VGC, and it's even more stressful here, making those decisions at the World Championships.
Yeah, well, it is time for our post-game interview. I cannot wait to hear Shohei's thoughts after that one, so it's time to toss to Anna over on the stage.
想不到竟然他先结束气，害我刚刚期待那么久。
Congratulations on a great game. You lost the first one, but then came back. How did you keep your mental strength?
試合の勝ちおめでとうございます。最初ゲーム負けたのに、どうやってまだ心強く次のゲームへ勝ちましたか？1試合目は闇波に根源の波動を外してしまったで負けてしまったのですが、2試合目は、普段通りプレイしていれば勝てるというのは分かっていたので、特に落ち込むということはありませんでした。In the first game, he got tricked by the Sableye. But in the second game, he just kept his cool and didn't let him fall for the same tricks. And he played to his game plan, and he managed to win.
Yeah, tell us about that winning moment and how you feel about it. What happened, and how did it feel?
最後の試合はちょっと短くて、どうでしたか？なんでそういうなりましたか？まあ時間切れも相手の力量というかなんというか力量なので仕方がないですが、やはり嬉しい気持ちでいっぱいです。His opponent timed out on the move selection screen, which is a shame. You don't want to win like that, but a win is a win, and he's going to move forward.
Moving forward, how does the competition look for you? Are you looking forward to playing any particular players or teams, or are any very challenging for you?
今からなんか戦いたい選手とかなんか戦いたいこと
跟我一样。
そうですね。Day 1から Day 2でもね。Day 1だとウォルフグリックさんで、Day 2だとアガチさんとマルコ・フィエロさんと戦いたいです。Well, if it's Day 1, he wants to play Wolf Glick, and he wants to play. Sorry, who was it? もう一回。Marco Fierro and Agachi.
Wow, that's a good list. Well, we will watch your games with great interest. Thank you. Congratulations again. And now we'll head over to Aaron at the analyst desk.
Thank you very much, Anna.
他不管是嬉闹还是巨兽斩，他一定会下去啊！他为什么不守住？我不懂，还是他没有学守住？就是赌对方不会打就对了啊！太自信了吧！你刚刚那一回合，你只要换下去，你换那个幽蝉上来，对方一定会吃瘪啊，直接死去啊！
like he's probably one of the best players in the world, like, kind of playing that sort of teams. I'm really glad we got the chance to see that. It was fun that he was against such a good opponent while he was
然后当对方那个什么东西，对方
I get it now. Like all right, this is why he has these accomplishments.
这叫什么？
It was a really fun back and forth set. Obviously timeout.
对方的一个火苗上来，你再立刻再切也都可以啊。
Relatively standard Kyogre Zacian team, and then Ben using a very untraditional team with Kieran White and Sableye, and so. Yeah, I want to talk first a little bit just about Ben's team because it's so unorthodox that I think it definitely deserves a mention. And first of all, Ben as a player is just, in my eyes, one of the most creative players in the world. I think his tournament runs just throughout the last couple of years, he's always bringing really innovative stuff. And so when I think of players from the US, he definitely strikes me as one of the most creative team builders. And players throughout the year, Wolf, I think, especially when he was starting out, was one of those players. Ashton Cox, especially from 2014, kind of towards 2017, used these really innovative teams. And Ben, to me, is a player that I think we were both talking, hey, if we were players, we would not want to go up against him because you pair such a good player with such a good team or such a scary team, and it just causes so many mind games. But I think Shohei adapted so well after what was probably a disastrous game one and really managed to bring that series back.
Yeah, I think that like Ben is like the worst possible type of opponent on day one. If like you're a really experienced player, you're good at playing conventional teams, or like if you get a normal match, like you probably feel really good about your odds. But like Ben's so good at what he does that like I don't think anybody can feel good sitting across the table from him. Where it's like you're playing a matchup you're probably not super familiar with, and even if
怎么都没有访问输的那一个呢？说好输的呢？ 输的要访问一下，问他说你为什么不守住呢？你为什么这么猛？人家的西闹巨兽斩都还是可以秒掉你，为什么不守呢？
It was because you got tricked, not because you got outplayed. But he's a player who can outplay you with tricks, which I think that makes all the more impressive that Shohei pulled it out. Because I think, especially if they're dropping the game one, we've been talking about the importance of winning that first game and how difficult it makes sets. I think this is like the epitome of the worst possible scenario to fall down that first game, where it puts so much pressure on you to make all the guesses correct.
不守真的是很勇，第一次看到不守。
Talking a lot about Ben, but of course Shohei, the real star, managing to come back down after 0-1 and losing in a really kind of convincing manner as well, and being able to really rein it in. So. I mean, first of all, Shohei, I think a very animated player. We've seen him actually compete at the World Championships for many, many years. In my eyes, definitely one of the top threats from Japan. And I think the way he adjusted in that second game, I want to highlight on a little bit, right? Because the first game, it felt like it was just kind of a complete sweep, right? I think part of it was the Shedinja coming out, right? As soon as the Thunderous fainted, Ben was like, okay, well, time to bring out Shedinja. That's it. And against Zacian plus Kyogre, that's exactly one of the reasons why Shedinja is a powerful pick in this format. Kyogre and Zacian, neither of them can actually really do anything into Shedinja unless you're running something really obscure like Snarl on Zacian. And that is a tech that some players run to specifically beat Shedinja, but it's like, well, is it worth actually giving up a slot like a quick attack, a Swords Dance, a substituted player up for Snarl? And for most players, that answer is no.
Yeah, I think it's super fun too. This matchup is like the reverse of what we used to expect from like some of the Japan versus US matchups, where it used to be we have the American players playing these like kind of boring bog standard teams. Like, oh no, like what crazy nonsense will the Japanese players have to beat us with? This one's backwards, right? Where it's like the really experienced, really strong Japanese player playing something more conventional, and the crazy young American player, right? Where it's fun to kind of like. I'm glad that both sides are kind of like contributing to trying to make this sort of off-the-wall team. And it should be fun all weekend, right? Kind of to see the dichotomy where what type of style wins out.
Absolutely. I want to focus a little bit on that second game specifically because, of course, this is where Shohei really started that comeback, right? And so the leads were actually the same, right? So this is the first turn of the second game, and it's just Kyogre Zacian again. Now, before we even get started, this situation is really scary if you're Shohei, right? There's so many things that Sableye and Kyurem can do. For example, you can Quash plus Max Quake into Zacian. You can fake out Max Quake into that. You can fake out Zacian Max Quake Kyogre, which is kind of what Ben opted for here, and Ally Switch, right? That's actually what we saw to start off game one. And so it's really hard to fully know what's coming your way. And I think Shohei realized, okay, well, I lost to Shedinja in the first game, right? And Dynamax Kyogre, well, that can't do anything against Shedinja other than maybe Max Hailstorm, but Shedinja so often carry safety goggles, especially on a team with Kieran White, right? And so you're thinking, okay, well, I need to get a better Dynamax, right? And so I think Shohei very smartly this time around just stays in with Kyogre and with the Zacian and doesn't Dynamax Kyogre either, saying, okay, I need to stall out the Kyurem Dynamax. Kyurem's one of the most impressive Pokemon in the format. In order to beat it, I'm going to have to try to play a little bit defensively early on because with Sableye, I'm not just going to be able to knock it out with Zacian immediately.
Yeah, I think it's really smart. You know, we've kind of seen this adjustment in a number of matches where players have realized they needed to play a little bit slow at the beginning. I think late Dynamaxing has been really effective so far today. We kind of see another one in this game.
Yeah, so you know, turn one
多好的混乱呢！
being a fairly good trade for Ben. He's
混乱鬼蝉到底跑去哪里了呢？
Water spell comes out, and so right now it feels like Ben's still in a pretty good spot. But I think the next
赶快刷完，我也要来
goes for another fake out, doesn't get
来
another
休
attack
息。
off. Sometimes it actually is just the case where you
这不知道打到几点？应该打到12点吧。
switch. You don't really want to click ally switch, but maybe like a timeout or a misclick there. But Kieran here critically just ends up going for another max quake into Kyogre, right? That could have been something like a max worm win to maybe just get the knockout onto it, or maybe you predict
已经一半喽，
because if you can, for
大概在10分钟就结束。
on the switch in through a hailstorm and knock that out, suddenly there's no tailwind support anymore, and your Sableye still hangs around.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a turning point in the game, right? Where just not enough value out of this turn. You know, it's tough where, especially when you Dynamax early, like you're really committing to getting those first few turns right. In this game, yeah, I just think Shohei just had the upper hand.
Yeah, so of course, you know, fake out not really coming out. And here, this is the main thing with Kyurem, right? When you're using a Pokemon like Kyurem, you really want to get as many knockouts as possible, as quickly as possible. It's very much similar to, reminds me of something like Dialga, or maybe Sobaleo.
如果未来啊，未来那个什么战斗啊，它那个用招式会影响场地，然后你要去计算场地的破坏，就跟魔物一样，你要去记一下场地有没有被破坏。 然后你的招式会有增加减，我觉得哇，神作。
Your Pokemon, right? Your partner Pokemon, that's Kyurem. But like, if Kyurem's not actually getting those knockouts, then you're kind of just on the field, you know, dancing around, but you're not exerting actually that much pressure.
Yeah, Sableye doing his best Gastrodon impression here and kind of just like existing on the field. I think it's especially tough, right? Because yeah, ally switch is a big one where it's not. We see it here in the replay actually, but it's not a button that's inherently good to click, right? Like Quash, I guess for instance, it's almost always good even if it's irrelevant, right? Like ally switch, you can actively make things worse for yourself by clicking it wrong. Sableye has kind of a bunch of moves like that, like you know, fake out can only be used once, so yeah, it's a risky Pokemon once you're falling behind.
And I think Whimsicott's one Pokemon that Shohei did a fantastic job adjusting to, right? He didn't bring it in the first game, but brought it to the second game. Thunderous came out in the first game. It came in, wasn't even a good position to Dynamax, just fainted and for one, right? But from Shohei's perspective, the reason why he wanted to bring Thunderous in game one is because in
以前那个4代的时候，它场地会被破坏啊，会被影响。虽然它影响是影响一些战斗的范围啦，它不会实际影响到打的部分，就是高低落差那一种。可是你看，像那个尼欧龙啊，尼欧龙它的那个也可以不一下子场地破，一下子场地改变啊，就是你那个什么，很像台阶的那一个，是希望有了。
So the Tailwind is really valuable. You don't get baited, and Kyurem actually gets an Origin Pulse along the way as well.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out what Pokemon isn't on the field here right now. Also on Shohei's side of the field, where you know he was much better in this game, even though he didn't bring the Thunderous. But then in preserving Incineroar, where we never saw Shedinja again after the first game. But if we did, there was never actually a chance where Ben could have sent it out and like had anything happen, where he would have immediately had it get matched up with Incineroar on the other side. I thought that was a nice little adjustment. Ironically, the game where there were more available answers to Shedinja, he lost them all immediately. And then played really well against that in the following two.
Exactly. So you know, I think
我真心觉得台湾宝可梦真的是不知道怎么讲。那个
right. So this turn, I think a pretty standard one. You know that the Sableye is going to faint after the hail. You know, make sure that it just
应该是说其他国家的那个宝可梦啊，都会有一些他们所谓的官方的直播，或者是转播，或者是找人家来讲解之类的。可是台湾的完全没有，就发个 FB 就结束了，真是难怪宝可梦真的是不被重视，就是这个原因。
Maybe not the most popular restricted pick in this format. You're so weak to Zacian, right? Like, okay, Behemoth Blade, he just KOs you, Dynamax outside of Dynamax. And so that's why Kyurem White teams typically have a lot of unique support. Actually, a lot of other teams don't run, right? So Ally Switch is more valuable because it's like if you can deter one Behemoth Blade, that changes how the game is played. Scarf Ditto is common because it can just copy an opposing Zacian and then outspeed it in Behemoth Blade. And you not only copy their original attack boost, you get one one as well, so it's like a +2 attack Zacian. And then, you know, we have the imprisoned Zacian here as well, and that's something that's going to come out.
Truly an awesome tech. Yeah, it makes perfect sense of this team, right? Where, you know, if you see us at home, like, oh, I'm imprisoned, that's awesome. I probably wouldn't just, you know, slap that on whatever team you happen to have in, you know, open in your team builder. But I think this specific situation, even though it didn't quite work out, it's super cool.
Yeah, this turn was one I was curious about. I didn't know exactly how fast the Zacians were relative to each other, and so I was.
我是真的觉得刚刚那一场还蛮可惜的，他那一场真的是失误，太自负。 因为他有优残，他基本上他的优势很大，可是他真的太自负。
actually gets the imprison off, then you deny the free attack, and then the Kyurem can just get a repower off and maybe knock out the Zacian immediately. And suddenly in my head, then that's a completely different game, right? Because Kyurem is conserved, and Incineroar plus Kyogre are both not very strong into Kyurem.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting, right? I mean, if that was a speed tie and it went the other way, this game's over, like right there. Kind of the second one we've seen right that, where coin flip just kind of, you know, flips either way.
Actually, very critically, one thing I did forget was Tailwind was still up in this position.
Yeah, all right, so. Yeah. Well, interesting.
I think that, yeah.
I forgot that too, yeah.
Yeah, it was funny because in my head I was like, okay, you don't really need Tailwind because you're already faster, but critically it actually really mattered for a situation like this. So Tailwind coming in, you know, very, very clutch here. Zacian gets the imprison up, but I think in Ben's head he's like, well, I can't really switch out right now, right? Because he's trying to play towards the Urshifu endgame anyway, and so you just sacrifice the Kyurem. It is interesting because there is the idea of actually switching Kyurem out, maybe sacrificing Urshifu to get Kyurem back in, and suddenly now you've imprisoned the Zacian. But it's still kind of scary. Like, Incineroar has fake out pressure the next turn. The Zacian can be pivot out, but I think that's one other route you can take. Instead, this was where we also got a lot of surprises. So the Imprison in itself was surprising. Of course, Incineroar now under the Tailwind still. The Zacian on Shohei's end can't do very much, and so, you know, Ben actually ends up opting for the double up onto the Incineroar with Sacred Sword and Close Combat and still fails to get the KO.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we're going to find that Chopal Berry again, which winds up being incredibly clutch here, keeping Incineroar on the field, although likely, you know, the knockout that we're about to see on Ben's Zacian winds up probably closing this game anyway. But yeah, we were so close to seeing the Imprison MVP play. Like, it's not as close as we thought when we were watching the game with the Tailwind there, but you know, it's just that close.
Yeah, and so I think here, you know, quick attack, you can obviously go for like Behemoth Blade, and so you might as well get some free chip damage off. The Sacred Sword here, you know, goes into the Chopal Berry Incineroar. So before we even go on, I want to talk about Chopal Berry Incineroar really quickly, because that's not very common on Incineroars in this format.
Yeah, I mean, we see Shucca Berry all the time. We see some of the other, like, more gimmicky items if you're trying to do something really clever with the Incineroar, but you almost never see Chopal anymore, right? Just other than Sacred Sword, there just aren't many fighting type attacks in the format. Some of the things, I think I like it where, again, you know, it works well in the mirror. I think it happened to work out in a matchup I'm certain he never even considered here. But, like, yeah, I mean, anything you can do to give yourself an edge against the most common Pokemon, I think it makes sense. And that's kind of the one thing on Ben's side of the field that isn't, like, super unconventional, right? It's like, we've seen a Fusation, and we're going to see a few more before the Dave's done, right? And I, like, weirdly runs into something that's, like, intended to counter standard teams while using one of the least standard teams we've seen.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, in this position, I would always expect the Incineroar to feint to a close combat plus Sacred Sword combination. One of the main reasons you want to run Chopal Berry, I mean, we just talked about how it's so good against Zacian, but Zacian's one of those interesting Pokemon where it's like, okay, you switch an Incineroar, you get an Intimidate, but if they Behemoth Blade you, that still does a hefty amount of damage at neutral, and then a Sacred Sword can just finish you off, right? Like, you would need a lot of defensive investment in order to actually, you know, guarantee a survival there. And so, yeah, like the Incineroar here critically survives the double up, as you can see, and from that point on, it's basically over. But Scott, you mentioned a really good point to me during the second game, and it was if Zacian had protected here, we don't know if it has protect, right? But if it had the opportunity to protect there, then you just bypass the turn completely and like blow the Chopal Berry away from the Incineroar.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. It's just that close, right? I mean, I'm assuming there's no protect there because I think it's like Ben seems too good to have just whiffed on that. But yeah, without that, you know, you get that one extra turn, you knock out the Incineroar without losing Zacian, and then suddenly the Zacian on the other side of the field never gets to attack again. It's just spamming quick attack for the rest of the game. So, you know, another way that, like, Ben was just inches away. It was a really good set, and I guess all the more props to Shohei too for winning one that I think was a really tricky set to navigate for him.
Yeah, and I mean, we have to touch on that game 3. Obviously, it literally ended in one turn, and I think Shohei had actually mentioned that Ben had timed out in the beginning of the game because I know you and I were actually kind of puzzled when Ditto came out as a lead. The thing about Ditto as a lead Pokemon is like it is literally coin flipping, right? And it actually can work in the right matchup, but you have to be so confident on it, right? You have to essentially, I'd only bring it if I were like, okay, I either have no better options or regardless of which Pokemon I'm copying, it will give me a significant advantage. And to Shohei's credit here, he brought the Whimsicott, right? That's another adjustment, leading it rather than going with Kyogre and Zacian. So normally we're like, oh, Ditto, you know, it copies the Zacian, but it's like, well, okay, Whimsicott can just Tailwind now, and Zacian pressures with Behemoth Blade onto either. This game essentially ended in one turn, right? But Shohei also made a really good call. He's saying, well, I don't even need to Tailwind and gamble on which one of the two, like, I can KO, right? Because Ben's playing this position is simply to switch one out and try to use the other one to get the KO. And Shohei's saying, well, I have Intimidate, right? And my Zacian I expect to survive a Behemoth Blade, so if I switch into Incineroar, your Scarf Zacian presumably won't be able to knock me out, and I'll just knock your Kyurem out, and it works out even better because the Zacian doesn't even stay in and try to attack the opposing Zacian. Instead, it was Sableye coming in.
Yeah, I think it's almost too bad, because I think what makes Ben's team great is that normally there are no safe options, right? When you're staring down the Kyurem Sableye thing, there is some option he can pick that will work against whatever you pick, so you kind of have to figure out how to manage your odds the best. In this case, Shohei found something that was like a completely safe move, right? Like, barring like a critical hit or something ridiculous, like he's going to take a knockout and he's not going to have one come back in return, and that just can't happen with this order team that Ben's running.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure some viewers may be puzzled on why a forfeit after turn one, but truly there is no way, I think, for Ben to come back after that. You're relying on Sableye, which is incredibly passive. Ditto isn't even really copying something great in that position. It would come in and copy the Incineroar. So there's really, really no path to come back there to victory. So really amazing job to Shohei for, I think, having a lot of resilience, especially after getting, you know, kind of blown out in that first game and bringing this amazing comeback. So I just love to continue to see the teams here, and I think, you know, this is the World Championship. Sometimes there are nerves, sometimes you time out. I think people often think, you know, everyone should be playing optimal Pokemon, but you and I have been in that position before, and, you know, I've timed out in World Championships before, I've misclicked before. That's just how these tournaments are. They're really high pressure. We're all humans at the end of the day, and that's one really important factor to remember as well.
Yeah, and I think another thing is important to remember, right? I mean, each of these players only needs 6 wins to move on, right?
Yeah.
So 3-1, you're still on pace, right? So I mean, everybody's looking to go undefeated, you know, get that stress out of the way early, but you know, still a good chance we see both these players playing tomorrow.
Absolutely. So that's going to be it from us for this round. Thank you so much for tuning into the couch, and let's take it back.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I am Sierra Hunter, joined here yet again by Joe Brown. I have to say, I love the little analysis sections. I like being able to take a breath. I get to listen to talk about the game, go back through everything we just watched. It just feels right.
Yeah, hearing some legendary VGC analysts breaking down the matches that we just saw is definitely a treat, and I'm really, you know, appreciating it, having it here at Worlds this year. It's pretty fun, and I'm trying to recover, honestly, Sierra, from that last set. But yeah, you know, I have high hopes for our next matchup, but I don't know what's going to be able to live up to those expectations that have now been set. Like, that's World Championship level VGC. That's what everyone has to play at that caliber now.
We had everything in that last match. We got to see the Ditto, we got to see the nerves, we got to see the turn 1 forfeit. I definitely did not have that on any predictions, any bingo cards, nothing. The turn 1 forfeit. But it was great to see, and I do love the fact that they touched upon the fact that this is Worlds. These players are still really doing well, even though there was a mistake that happened earlier on. There was the timeout. Sometimes leads don't go right. There is going to be that nerves. There are going to be mistakes that are made, and it's only what you do now going on forward in the competition that should define your run, not just this one particular moment.
Right, for sure. We always have to remember that this is just one loss, right? So it's sometimes unfortunate because many times people who lose on stream, we don't see them on stream for the rest of the day, right? So you don't know what's tracking, but Ben could have lost that set and then win every other round for the entirety of day 1, right? That's just how Pokemon works. So you can't really get too caught up in one loss just because it was on stream, because it's the same loss that would be out on the floor as well, right? So you have wiggle room, you have the 2 loss wiggle room of moving on to day 2 at Worlds. So I wouldn't be too, and Kohei obviously is an incredible player there, so you don't feel too bad about losing that set.
I mean, you still can, but you can't be.
Oh, Shohei. I mixed his names up.
Yeah.
Kimura, yeah, Shohei, excuse me.
I mean, it was a great victory by Shohei, and the thing is now they just have to go on forward. Ben has to go on, just, you know, the loss didn't happen, or it did. We just got to go on forward and make the impression going on here on out. But it's time now to get started with our next match of the day.
我这边也结束了，准备来休息了。
As it's time to head over to the stage with our players. For our next round, it is going to be David Futesh going up against Kohei Inamoto.
Yeah, so David Koches, a European player from the Czech Republic, has qualified for Worlds multiple times, 2 separate times, top 32 at the World Championships, as well as 7 different regional top cuts throughout his VGC career. So it's very impressive from David as well. I'm pretty sure David was pretty rock solid in the online era during the Players' Cups. I feel like I'm vaguely remembering how, you know, great he was doing in those Players' Cups and performing in online events, and a very fun team builder. I know I've actually seen David have some really cool archetypes. A team I used in the Players' Cup was off of a Lappers team that David built as well, like a really fun strategy that he came up with on that team. So really excited to see how he does. And then Kohei Inamoto is a player where 2018 was his best season in VGC, as Kohei was able to qualify for the World Championships with a top 16.
好了，我这边结束了。明天哦，明天我应该会开闪车了，边开闪车边那个看直播。但是我不确定啊，因为昨天长毛其实蛮少人上车的，现在考虑。
You've probably had so much experience with going to the different regionals or special events in Europe throughout the season.
晚一点我要来去组刚刚那一个混乱邪恶。
Kind of, what is his wrinkle on the metagame? What is his area of expertise that he's played throughout Series 12?
百龙那是什么垃圾？百龙太花时间了，不打。你说打斗技场那个可以啊，百龙我真的不打。但我自己打都打到快觉得恶心死。
What his strategy he came up with for Worlds.
I mean, we also keep talking about the surprises, and I want to see all the surprises, but we do have to remember that some players are going to be going for these comfort picks through the day. One, do I want to see that? I want to see the spicy stuff. I want to see what makes it on through that we never could have imagined, but we can't only just talk about the surprises.
No, it's an interesting dynamic between day 1 and day 2, because if you run something crazy on day 1, you might not even make it to day 2. So I really like what Kohei has brought here to the stage. Is anyone I've told all season, the Palkia and Calyrex Ice Rider core or restricted pairing has definitely been my favorite through all of Series 12.
You're talking about, I love both of these teams that you're talking about, Chaos. I'm also looking at David's team here. We're going to be having this Gyarados, Ferrothorn, Yveltal, which we've kind of seen off a little bit, but when it's utilized right, it can be working out so well. And I'm naturally just drawn to this storyline of this Dialga versus this Palkia. These two Egg Legendaries battling it out to tail to all his time and space.
Space and time. We've had a pretty significant game based off of this matchup here in Dialga versus Palkia. So let's see how that faces off.
Now heading into the first game between these two players, the first look at what they can be expecting. It is going to be that ultimate face down as Dialga and Palkia hit the field. Partner Pokemon going to be Thundurus for David, and the Porygon 2 over on Kohei's side with that Trace to grab that Prankster ability.
Sinnoh fans rejoice in this moment right here. The Trace is actually pretty important.
比克提尼努力值要怎么练？你这样这个问题问得很好啊。等一下。
Throughout the match, while it's on the field, you would have the priority thanks to being Prankster, and that also shows that the Thundurus being Prankster is not that Defiant set that has been much more popular, right, throughout most of the season.
等我一下，比克提尼的努力值哦。对哦，先来看一下。
This really seems like a protect the Dialga comp. You have 4 flying types, as Dialga's main weakness is ground, right? So that's something that we can look at throughout this match is what can David do to facilitate his Dialga in this matmatchup?
给各位看一下。
Pokemon of choice to be going for this Dynamax to look to apply this early pressure. I mean, it should be well supported with the fact it is going to be that Prankster and more supportive Thundurus type beat, but it's not going to be the only Pokemon going for this Dynamax. Kohei as well opting to apply this early game strategy and go for this Dynamax Palkia.
This is pretty cool for
有种语言完成。
Dialga here. I wonder what the Palkia has to
截个图吧。
Very strong damage to the Dialga there, and the benefit, as the ally switch just showed up, is that your teammate can really help you with Porygon.
At this point now, the taunt Surely would have been going into the other slot, into the Porygon 2, is now hitting into this Palkia. And you know the Palkia in Dynamax doesn't care about that taunt. It just wants to go in for that damage. Now the Max Quake going to hit into this Porygon 2
我要看一下，因为
honestly, I wouldn't
那一
really
只
think
我
it
没什么
considering the
研
damage
究。
that it done. It brings it down to about half, and that's about it.
Right, and
那我转播的我就先关掉喽。
But remember, you have Prankster recover.
比克提尼哦。 比克提尼它的都平均的嘛，都是平均值。然后它配的招式是什么？我看一下 ，V 嘛 ，V 热焰，基本上就是物理跟速度啦。它这个练防御也没什么帮助。我看一下哦。 速度满167，所以速度是还可以。基本上就是速度跟攻击啊，就是它也是一个玻璃炮。然后看一下哦，你也可以带起死回生啊，起死回生、V 热焰那些都是可以的。然后还有什么物理招？雷电拳啊，以防万一。 然后格斗劈瓦、急速折返或者是弹跳，这些都还蛮不错的招式的部分。还有什么意念头锤就比较还好了。他也可以学特殊啦，只是他学特殊，你的那个 V 热焰就没办法使用了，还蛮可惜的。就基本上 V 热焰还是会比较好。 虽然它会降那个防御、特防跟速度各降1阶，可是，在晴天的情况下，基本上这一只打下去都可以秒杀了吧？
防攻100不是很惨吗？
你说很惨吗？这个要看是看什么角度也没有说特别不好了。 因为它这个就是变成你可以玩，就是它没有特别好的地方，但是它也没特别坦哦。3防都100%坦没有啦，因为它这一只的坦我看一下哦，等一下哦，它的防御最高也才167，特防也是167而已。 所以你不管怎么样，你不可能2项167，所以你大概就是134到150左右而已，就135到150左右，两边都差不多。然后你又加 HP， 所以它可能更低。基本上它这个没有特别突出了，而且以它的这个能力种族值来看的话，没有特别好用，不是特别好用的，就是以坦来说啦，如果你说你要用坦的话，因为它的专属招 V 热焰啊，威力是180，命中是95，虽然会降防啦，可是没什么差。你一级秒掉，你再换别只就好了，再直接回去，然后上来又是一个全新的，超爽。这只可以玩空间吗？这只不行玩空间了，这只没办法玩空间，而且它6V。 基本上很难玩到空间了，然后也不用什么干扰招式，也不用大自爆。如果你要玩特攻的话，也是可以的，只是特攻就没有那么理想了。他可以玩那个特攻了，他的特攻。 没有比较好他特攻没有比较好，对吧？他的特攻真的是没有比较好。不过 S13啦，应该会很多人带这一只因为这只现在是免费的嘛，所以一定会有很多人带了。然后很多人带的话，就一定会有人带火杆上来了。火杆上来基本上，大家都知道嘛，火会被吸。 好了，那剩下明天再讲好了。反正今天也没什么事情，大家就早点休息吧。拜拜。
8888。